Kaylee would tell you the same thing. To know her was to love her. Her love for life and everyone in it was so inspiring. She made it a priority to make everyone feel so important and so loved.
There was never a day that she didn't want to race her brother because she was just determined that girls were faster than boys, or that she didn't want to go bug her little sisters.
Favorite memory for me was watching the game with her, and every time the Steelers scored, I'd pick her up and I'd hold her high in the air.
I didn't really realize that I was in love with Maddie until the summer of 2020. We went to McCall and spent a lot of time on the water. We floated the river and just hung out every chance we got.
They went to other countries together. Karen took them to Hawaii together. We took them to Mexico together. They went to college together. They went to high school together. They lived in their own apartment together. They were sisters.
She was so positive and lighthearted and understood the gift of life more than anyone I know. I remember her getting so mad at me for caring about the little things that didn't matter. She would always tell me she wouldn't know what to do without me, and now I have to live this life without her.
And she taught me a lot of stuff. She taught me how to be a dad, and I didn't know that until she was gone, you know?
Xana, you will not be forgotten. You have impacted so many lives and have given people so much love. I hope I can make you proud and try to leave an impact on this world and on people like you did.
He had such an infectious smile and a charismatic personality. And if you knew anything about Xana as well, they were very similar in how they acted together.
They were always so happy, and the way she would talk and smile about him was something I've never seen her do before. She truly loved him so much, and I know he had so much love for her.
We are eternally grateful that we spent so much time with him. And I want to remind you that that's the most important message that we have for you and your families, is to make sure that you spend as much time as possible with those people, because time is precious and it's something you can't get back.
Hello, dreamers, and welcome to this latest episode of California Dreaming. I am your ever-present host, Roseanne. Before we get started, I have a few notes about the show and a couple of announcements. This is an independent podcast that has remained ad-free for almost 8 years now. Yep, this month at the end of June, we'll be celebrating our 8th anniversary. And we have always been 100% subscriber supported. And I'm happy to report that the additional effort and focus dedicated to Patreon is paying off, and subscriber numbers are climbing, which I am grateful for. I mailed out little thank you cards and gifts and packages and stickers to more than 60 subscribers and former subscribers as well. I got you your OJ stickers, and I have more that I've ordered. Those of you who are signing up for Patreon, you all will get perks if you opt in to receive mail from me. So I want to thank all of you who reached out or messaged me or posted on social media. I'm glad that everything got to you. There are just a couple of people that I haven't mailed to yet, and Rebecca Jane over there in the UK, I forgot because we talked about it on a different platform, and I completely spaced mailing yours, but I'll get to it. The month of May was difficult. I just wasn't feeling myself. And then over the last week and a half, I've been really sick. You might even kind of still hear it in my voice. It's a little raspy, but a week ago, I didn't have any voice at all. For now, I have some subscribers on Patreon that I would like to say thank you to. Lotus M in Riverbank, California. Dusty in Brooklyn, New York. Katie R in the UK. Wendy W in Soquel, California. Okay, this one is spelled Aloxia. Aloyxa, I guess. Thank you for subscribing. April G in Box Elder, South Dakota. Kelly M in Hazlet, Texas. Mindy E in Cedartown, California. Thomas M. Rebecca B in Louisville, Kentucky. Dana K and Jonathan B. in Middlebury, Vermont. All of you, thank you so much for either joining Patreon, either back in September or October, in case you've forgotten. If you've opted in on Patreon with your mailing information, you should be getting a surprise from me. Thank you all so much for your support. I do have plenty of more thank yous in upcoming episodes, so don't worry, I haven't forgotten any of you. All right, that's all I have for the housekeeping. I think that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to focus on us, our little show here, and all the content that we have on your platforms that you listen to the free show on, and of course over on Patreon, which is still the only place that you can show your love and support for the show by way of subscribing. All right, let's get started with today's episode.
911 location of your emergency.
Something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address, 1122 King Road.
And what's the phone number that you're calling from?
What's your phone number?
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates has passed out, and she was drunk last night, and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. Hi, this is...
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened very much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, but we gotta go check. But we have to. Is he passed out? She's not waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20 here. 20.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Okay.
You talk to them, okay? I can't talk to them. I need you to talk to them.
Hello?
Okay. I have already sent the ambulance and law enforcement. Stay on the line. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
Say that again? There's a police here right now.
Okay. If there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
We don't have one. I think yes. Do you have a defibrillator? Yes, you have one.
Are you talking to the officer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let you go since he's there with you and can help you.
Many of us woke up on a late fall Sunday morning about 2.5 years ago. We heard that something tragic and terrifying happened at a home full of college roommates in a college town in Idaho, close to the eastern border of the state of Washington, the town of Moscow. 4 University of Idaho students, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Madison Mogan, were murdered, stabbed to death, as far as we knew, by a lone perpetrator. One person created all this havoc and carnage. One seemingly smart, painfully awkward, yet homicidal and obsessed 27-year-old at the time named Bryan Kohberger. Kohberger is on the precipice of trial, which is currently scheduled to start on Monday, August 11th, 2025, though there may be further postponements or delays. It does seem to be moving along well. There have been motions to suppress evidence, to throw stuff out, such as the DNA evidence, which led investigators to Kohberger to begin with. But none of that has really been going well for Kohberger, who, if convicted, could potentially be sentenced to death. Another thing that his attorneys have been fighting against. They want the death penalty to be taken off the table, but that is not happening. In fact, in the time since all of this happened, and I believe I mentioned it in one of the 5 episodes that I've done previously about this case, that not only is the death penalty alive and well in Idaho, but the governor had since added the firing squad to Kohberger's menu options. That's going to be some time down the road. But the reason I'm doing this episode is because we've covered it extensively, and I usually like to wait until after the trial before I revisit a story that, when I covered it, it was still breaking news. But Dateline recently had an update episode, and I watched a YouTuber from somewhere in Europe, maybe like the Netherlands or something, where she went over some of the new information that Dateline had, and she said that where she's from, they don't get to watch Dateline, which I wasn't sure I was aware of. I may have been, but forgot. But she did say she had an American connection who helped her out. And while I'm not going to play any clips or anything from the Dateline episode, I do want to make sure I keep up with the story. I covered it at the beginning of 2023, after the new year, with the murders having happened less than 2 months earlier. Then I covered the story again that summer of 2023, when we learned more information about Kohberger in a 4-part series I created. If you want to revisit those, they're episodes number 248, and then the series is episodes 266 through 269. But since Dateline seems to have some insider information, I wanted to at least give those of you who didn't get to see the episode this newly reported information. And there are lots of details about the suspect that have since been uncovered, which may in some way lend to a motive in this case. There's been a lot of speculation about that, but unless Bryan Kohberger himself comes forward with it, then that's all we can do. But the one thing we've come to find for sure is that Bryan Kohberger is a strange guy. He's said to have been diagnosed with Asperger's, possibly even being on the autism spectrum. There's been some talk about his obsession with what he considers to be the quote-unquote ideal woman, and even how one of the roommates who was killed in this massacre could have very well been his main target. And all of this information, comes out as the investigation goes along, and that's when we get into the suspect's history. There at Washington State University, he had just started that fall, and things quickly went south. So let's get into what we know now, 2.5 years into this case, and just a handful of months out from seeing Bryan Kohberger face a jury. This was a crime that struck fear into the hearts of not just University of Idaho students, but the city of Moscow and the surrounding communities. But really, it sent fear across the nation. Fear overwhelmed parents and families and loved ones all over the world even. People who send their kids off to college with all those hopes and dreams and aspirations, excited to see their kids start their futures, but all of that came to a very confusing and heartbreaking and violently savage end for these four: Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Madison. And let's not forget their parents and their siblings, their grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews. So many countless people, hearts and lives shattered by the actions of the accused. I'll be honest with you up front, my dreamers, that seriously, I was convinced that Kohberger was the one responsible for these four murders as soon as the news broke that he was identified through a DNA match from that snap on that knife sheath that he dropped. And there is so much more information about how that DNA match was made and the controversy behind it. Using these genetic databases has sparked a conversation about the legalities of dipping into those databases in order to find close relatives to the individual who unwittingly and unknowingly deposited their DNA at a crime scene. In fact, the DNA information that Dateline had is a big reason why I wanted to give you this update. It's all really so sad. I was very sad writing this episode. So I don't really think that there's going to be too much kidding around and joking to be had this time, dreamers. I just want to put that out there in advance. There's nothing funny about this at all. In August of 2024, just as a new semester was set to begin at the University of Idaho, the campus dedicated a memorial, the Vandal Healing Garden, dedicated to not just the four who were murdered on that awful November night, but it honors all University of Idaho vandals who passed away while they were students at the school. It is a place of remembrance and healing through what the university's website describes as a creative, collaborative, holistic effort led and conceptualized by landscape design and architect students, guided by a community comprised of fellow students and university faculty, which drew inspiration from the surrounding community. The hope is to evoke a renewed sense of hope, as well as a very much needed sense of safety and security. The garden was fully funded by donations and in-kind support and continues to accept donations in order to maintain and upkeep and enhance this memorial. In a 2024 article in the Spokesman Review by Garrett Cabeza, the center of the garden includes a memorial engraved with Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Madison's names. Next to it, there are tall wooden blocks that provide a section for loved ones to place messages, poems, and memories. A sidewalk loops through and around the garden, which is lined with plants and flowers. There is a 20-foot tall beacon that illuminates at night at the top of a hill towards the south end of the healing space. That light will remain a symbol of hope for the rest of time. The garden now sits where more than 3/4 of a century had been a centralized location for community fun, activities, and gatherings there on McLean Field, where the Vandals football and baseball teams used to play. And it is just a short distance away from where that 3-story house where Ethan, Xana, Kaylee, and Madison were so brutally taken from this world. On Thursday, December 28, 2023, a little more than a year after the murders, the home that stood at 1122 King Road, the home where those 4 promising lives came to an end, that home was demolished. According to an article about the house on CNN.com, The home had actually been slated for demolition in July of 2022, just weeks before the start of the fall semester, and really just weeks before the murders. It's like another one of those games of what if that we sometimes play in hindsight. What if the demolition had gone through as planned? Perhaps Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Madison would be well on their way to whatever career paths they'd chosen for themselves. I don't like those what if questions, but I always acknowledge them. And there's going to be more in this case, probably forever. So many more what if moments as we go along. I don't know if it helps to make sense of things or not, but it definitely will give us pause and give us moments to reflect on those fleeting times in life. You know, like the time you decided to turn right instead of left. You know, that time that you zigged when you should have zagged. I guess the only thing we can do is look for the elusiveness of that ever-present reasoning or rationalizations that we like to make. The things that we like to tell ourselves to try and understand that everything happens for a reason. I don't even really like to have the ability to try and work through that right now, beyond the fact that these victims, their families, and those who survived, those who have somehow been able to move forward in life to try to find meaning in all of this. For me right now, if nothing else, I can only think of the lives that were saved or spared because Bryan Kohberger is being made to answer for this. And in the process, this man will never be able to harm another woman ever again. In the last series of episodes that I did on this case, I think I said I kind of hoped that the house would be left standing so that when the case would eventually be heard by a jury, that the potential to take them to the scene and walk them through the home and to see the layout would still be there. It was one of those things that I had a hard time with myself as I envisioned this maniac going from room to room and floor to floor, just stabbing everyone in his path. But I understand why the university wanted it gone. They didn't want it to become some kind of morbid tour bus destination. They wanted the reminders of that night gone. If nothing else, they've hopefully documented the home, possibly even reconstructed the crime under a theory of what most likely had occurred based on the evidence that they have. Days before the house was demolished, the suspect, Bryan Kohberger, was given access to the home to prepare for trial, and the prosecutors were also given access to the home. And in their own time, they made their way there, also to prepare for their case. The home used to be owned by the family of the president of the University of Idaho and was eventually donated to the university. And now, it's gone forever. As Keith Morrison so eloquently put it, since we last talked about this story, new information has been learned about the suspect, people who encountered him, people who knew him at the school, people he attempted to socialize with. And so we've been able to glean some insight into the man accused of carrying out this quadruple murder. One of the first things that's brought up is more security camera footage of that infamous white Hyundai Elantra, footage that had yet to be seen by the public. The house, and wow, it's so difficult to describe how tucked away and surrounded by other multi-level homes and winding roads and tall trees this place is. And we are shown a black and white video from somebody's porch. It's date and time stamped, with several clips shown from that dreadful morning, some before 4 a.m., and then one final clip around 4:20 a.m., that white Elantra driving away very quickly from the scene. Prior to that, the car can be seen circling the house or the block that the house was situated on numerous times, not going very fast, not the way it left, but just casually driving around several times before finally parking sometime around 4 in the morning give or take a few minutes. And then, just 18 to 20 minutes later, that vehicle took off at a higher rate of speed than it had been as it circled around previously, like someone trying to get out of there very, very quickly, in a panic. You can hear it too. You can hear the engine revving and the tires screeching. The next thing they show on the Dateline episode are several screenshots or maybe even just pictures or selfies of the suspect, Kohberger himself. He's wearing all black. He has the hoodies pulled up, sometimes pulled over a beanie too. And he just has this dead stare into his camera that really brings out the psychopath in his eyes. As Keith Morrison talked about the levels of brutality that went into the killings, details we had just not heard before, things like the excessive brutality that was evident towards two of the victims in particular, Ethan and Maddie. Ethan because he was the only male in the house, and Maddie Mogan because it's believed Kohberger targeted her specifically. From what it seems, the prosecution has theorized it was Maddie who became the focal point of Kohberger's obsession or anger or both. And the fact that there was a guy in the house, Ethan, it was necessary for him to be done away with quickly in order to be able to move on to the person or persons that the killer was there for. As for Maddie, well, we've all seen her social media photos and there's no mistaking she was quite a beautiful young lady. And that is basically it. It's believed that Kohberger had envisioned what an ideal woman would be like for him, and not long after he arrived at Washington State University, he somehow came to know her or came to know of her. He became fixated, and the theory is it all culminated in these 4 murders, 4 young people dispatched just like that. One of the people interviewed by Keith was a woman named Angela Navejas. Her daughter's name is Ashlyn. She'd grown up with Maddie, and the girls were close, like sisters. And Angela considered Maddie to be like a bonus daughter, a member of the family. Sorry, this is really getting to me today for some reason. This is Sunday, June 8th. I just started getting better. I just got back from California about 2 hours ago. I've been really desperate to get this episode recorded, and now that I'm here, I'm getting all misty over these kids, and I don't want that to happen because I have a lot more to get through. So, Maddie and Ashlyn. And not only did they grow up together, they attended college together, and Ashlyn had once roommated with Maddie in that very home on King Road, where Maddie's life and the lives of 3 others were snuffed out. And Kaylee and Xana were a part of Ashlyn's friend group as well. Together, over the couple of years or so that they shared that home, they'd sometimes go to Ashlyn's family home, about an hour and a half away in Coeur d'Alene, and spend weekends there if they didn't have much to do around the campus. And these girls were really living their best college life. They were doing it right. They weren't just a bunch of pretty faces. They were good, decent kids who really had their heads on straight. They loved to party. They loved to knock back a few. They loved being out and about on social media. And they really should have had no reason to live or be any other way but their genuine, authentic, happy selves, despite the Bryan Kohbergers of the world. These girls deserved to live their lives, enjoy their lives, and have nothing in the world to worry about. They were on their way to their adulting phase, but not quite yet. They had a little bit of time to still enjoy themselves to the fullest. But Ashlyn had finished up her time at the University of Idaho. So, as fate would have it, she would not be there the night of the killing. Maddie had another year before she was finished with her course of study. Kaylee had about half a year left. Xana at the time was a junior, and Ethan, her boyfriend, was a freshman. So they still had time to find themselves while they enjoyed themselves. As the summer of 2022 was winding down, the roommates at the King Road home were getting ready for the school year. They got settled into their 6-bedroom, 3-story home. Bryan Kohberger at that time was 2,500 miles away over in Pennsylvania, getting ready to begin the next phase of his own academic career. His college experience, his life experience as a whole was far different from those of the King Road house residents. College is really what you make of it, and while Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Maddie were having an experience of their own making, it may have been kind of what you would call a quintessential college life would have been like. It may have been the ideal life that Kohberger envisioned for himself when he decided to go to college. But Kohberger simply lacked social adeptness for whatever reason. Kohberger was clumsy and inept, and it showed. He struggled in relationships. He struggled with his weight, with substance abuse issues. But the one thing that Kohberger was able to fall back on, and I talked about this in my previous episodes, and I also brought it up in some of the episodes that we did on Leticia Stout, which I'm going to finish, and I'm so sorry that I let May pass me by without any content. It just was a weird month. Good, but weird. But how people like Leticia Stout and Bryan Kohberger, they have trouble with social situations and decorum. And what they'll do is they'll lean in hard on higher education in order to have at least that to fall back on, if nothing else. Leticia Stout was unable or incapable of flourishing or succeeding in the workforce, and problems tended to follow her wherever she went. But she had that alleged PhD to throw around, and it was often enough to get her foot in the door. But when it came to establishing herself in a career or a position at a place of employment, she struggled. I feel the same about Kohberger. In order to get anywhere in life, he was going to have to be impressive on paper because he fell flat in person. He wasn't going to be able to charm his way into a job or into a relationship either. At least not the kind of relationship with the kind of woman that he had become fixated upon. He was going to have to impress in other ways, such as his continuing education. Kohberger already had it in his mind when he arrived at Washington State that he was superior to two definitive groups of people: anyone with lesser education than him and women. Kohberger had a superiority complex, a grandiose sense of self, and a way overblown ego. It's that narcissism, once again, rearing its ugly head. And I know I do say that about a lot of the defendants that we talk about. But for Kohberger, in order for him to get around his plethora of shortcomings, he had to create a persona for himself that literally teetered on his college degrees. Kohberger grew up in eastern Pennsylvania. As he struggled through his teenage years, he posted some of his feelings online. We talked about these in previous episodes, but we'll go over it again as a reminder. Not specifically, but in small details. And these were writings or musings about his own mental health that he generated by himself. He wrote about having constant thoughts of suicide and his inability to feel emotions. He even wrote that whenever he looked in the mirror, all he could see was a sickly, tired, useless, stupid man. He wrote that nothing that he does is enjoyable. and that he does not deserve to live. He also wrote about using drugs and that helping him get through all of the suicidal thoughts. He wrote that he had been depressed since he was 5 years old. A friend of his from Pennsylvania reportedly told the news media or a reporter that he had developed a weird sense of meaning. He also went on to that forum that he wrote all this stuff on and talked about visual snow. We went into that in more depth in the previous episodes, but it's like this ringing in his ears and this fuzzy vision. Kohberger described it as being as if the demons in his head were mocking him. And he also described that when he hugged his family, he did not or was unable to see their faces. He described his existence as being akin to a video game. Another friend of Kohberger's said that he was consumed with these feelings and emotions to a point that he was becoming neurotic about it. Eventually, Kohberger worked on getting through some of these struggles with some migraine medications and a shift in his diet and eating habits and to avoid sugars and starches in order to help with the fuzzy vision. But when I looked it up, there were more things to include in your diet that were recommended to help improve vision, not so much what to avoid. But this isn't nutrition class, so we're going to just move on from there. Fast forward to 2022. Bryan Kohberger managed to work through his addiction to drugs, specifically heroin. With a change in diet and finding a measure of balance in his life, Kohberger also shed about 100 pounds or a little more than 45 kilos. He even chose to eat vegan. Along with some exercise and hitting the gym, Kohberger's feeling really confident, more confident, overly confident most likely, but more confident than ever. For the most part, Kohberger was becoming a different person. In order for him to be taken seriously as a PhD criminology student, he had to have enough self-awareness to know that even if he was a totally messed up person on the inside, his brain was wired differently. He was weird and everything was misfiring, even if he knew all of that about himself. He was at least going to do what he could to polish himself up on the outside. With a new look and a heroin addiction behind him, Kohberger was ready to move on to achieve his next academic goals, and those goals were what took him to Washington State University in the college town just across that state border from the University of Idaho, right there in the city of Pullman, Washington. Going back a little bit in time, after graduating from high school in 2013, Kohberger enrolled at the Monroe Career and Technical Institute, but within a year's time he dropped out. He then enrolled at Northampton Community College, where he earned his AA in psychology in 2018. Now, dreamers, I wasn't the most enthusiastic person in the world when it came to college, but I know my story and I know the kinds of trauma that I endured growing up with an abusive mother. So by the time I was reaching adulthood, I was completely lost. And some of the things that Kohberger wrote about himself as a teen on some of those online forums, I don't quite know where he was coming from or what he may have been feeling, but some of what he said kind of feels familiar. But he was someone who was interested in pursuing a PhD, and it stands out to me that it took him 5 years to earn a 2-year degree, and I languished in community college. I graduated from high school in 1992 and dropped in and out of school after that for most of the 90s. By the time I decided to go back after I had my daughter, I realized in around 2000-ish that I had just earned just enough credits for an AA. And because I went back to study child development and early childhood education, I ended up with a second AA in that field of study. And I want to say that was around 2001. It didn't take all that long, but all of that is to say is it took me almost a decade to earn that degree, and I didn't even get a bachelor's until 2006, some 14 years after I graduated from high school. Some people get through college in good time, in the time that they should. 4 years, boom, bachelor's. Couple more years, master's. And a couple more years after that, PhD. Not me, and not Bryan Kohberger either. And as for him, it looks as if Kohberger's mental and emotional struggles impacted him as he was transitioning from high school into college, from teenager into adulthood. He earned his AA at the age of 23, going on 24. He earned his bachelor's at the age of 25, going on 26. And then his master's he earned the year he was 27, turning 28. So, the kids that he's accused of murdering, they were on pace to earn their degrees within the 4 years following high school, with maybe the exception of Ethan, who was just in his freshman year at the University of Idaho, but had just started right before he turned 20. These kids were outpacing Kohberger in the game of life in just about every way possible, and he didn't like it. And you know, it could have been anyone that caught Kohberger's eye. It was only a matter of time from the moment he arrived at WSU that he would settle on someone specific to target. Kohberger had reinvented himself. He cleaned up, he slimmed down. He got that bachelor's, got that master's, and now on to the PhD and to the woman of his fantasies. Kohberger seemed to breeze through his bachelor's and master's programs in good time, and most of that was during COVID, which probably helped. So even then, Kohberger wasn't getting that full college experience that he may have been hoping for, since a lot of it, if not all of it, was online at the time. And so by the time COVID restrictions were letting up and the world was getting back to normal, sort of, it was in 2022-ish. And that was the time that he was gearing up to head west to Washington State. He quite possibly was looking for that college life experience. Based on some of his social media activities, which we will talk about in a little bit, he seemed to be seeking out some kind of social life, but there was a problem. Aside from his weird, awkward vibe, he aged out. He was too old to be part of that college lifestyle. And you know, Kohberger, when I look at some of the pictures taken of him around the time of the murders, and there are more pictures that he took of himself, like in the bathroom after he showered and stuff, he very much looks every single one of those 27 years, and they look like they kind of hit hard. And he just didn't fit in with the crowd that he wanted to fit in with. He was just too old. He actually kind of looks like an accountant. He simply wasn't going to fit in with the college crowd that he so desperately wanted to be around. So let's talk about that K-bar knife. We discussed it in the previous episodes, but by now you're familiar with that knife. It's historically been used in the military, and it would be an item that would link Kohberger to the quadruple murders, the only item. It was the thing that really broke this case wide open once they found DNA on the sheath that had been dropped, unbeknownst to the killer. We have a little bit more information about where that sheath was found and how it could have possibly been inadvertently left behind. When Kohberger was finishing up his master's degree at DeSales University, the investigation into his internet history revealed that he had browsed around on Amazon and made that very purchase, a K-bar knife. It was approximately 8 months before the murders. And you know, it really makes you wonder about how much in advance Kohberger had been thinking about this. I don't know when he was accepted to Washington State University. It could have been around the same time that he bought that knife, but 8 months is a good amount of time to purchase a murder weapon in advance of the murder. It's way more than a lot of people. So it's possible that Kohberger knew that this was something that he wanted to do someday, or he had the urge to do it in the months before he ever made his way to Washington State, months before he even knew of the victims or of the home that they would ultimately be killed in. Dateline reported that another bit of information discovered through the investigation into Kohberger's electronics was the fact that on June 25th, 2022, he was just about to drive away from his family home in Pennsylvania, destination Washington State University. And just as he was about to leave for that road trip, he took a picture of the rear of his car, that white Hyundai Elantra, still with its Pennsylvania license plate. 5 days later, he drove into the parking lot of his new apartment located in the graduate student housing complex. When he pulled in on that same day, he took a picture of the exterior of his apartment building for whatever reason. The same reasons that he may have been taking that final picture of his vehicle at his family home right before he left. Another interesting bit of information that has been discovered since we last covered this case involves the cell phone activity following the murders. In the hours after that white Elantra was seen speeding away from that King Road home at 4:20 in the morning, he got on the phone after he did that. Well, allegedly did that. His phone powered on. Kohberger had turned it off for quite some time that morning. We talked about this in the previous episodes, but as a reminder, Kohberger's phone was powered off at 3 a.m. on the morning of the murders. He lived about 15 minutes away from the University of Idaho. So this was an hour and 20 minutes prior to that Elantra quickly driving away from the area. He turned his phone off in Pullman, Washington at 3 a.m. He drove over to Moscow. He circled the house a few times, as captured on Ring doorbells and other surveillance. He pulled in and parked just after 4 a.m. He then sped away at 4:20 and boom, just like that, 28 minutes later at 4:48 a.m. at a cell tower located south of Moscow, still in the state of Idaho, Kohberger's phone kicked back on and was picked up by cell towers once again. Remember, we theorized in our previous episodes that Kohberger drove south along the Idaho-Washington state line in order to possibly dispose of evidence and perhaps calm himself down from what he had just done. But he was also on his phone, and we'll get to those details in a moment. But before we get to more of Kohberger's phone activity, we learned a little bit more about his attempts at meeting people and socializing after he arrived at the WSU campus in late June, going into July of 2022, a little more than 4 months before the murders. As Kohberger was moving in and unpacking his things about a week and a half after he got there, he met a neighbor who engaged him in conversation. After talking for a few, this neighbor told Kohberger about a pool party that they were going to over in Moscow, over the state line, but still super close. So on that Saturday, which turned out to be July 9th, yes, that July 9th nexus, birthday of Jodi Arias, Stephen Avery, Amanda Knox, good old and dead O.J. Simpson, all were born on July 9th. That pool party took place on that date at a place called The Grove. The DJ at the party, really, they called him the PhDJ apparently. He was a student there, and he had a bit of a memorable interaction with Kohberger, as did a couple of other guys by the poolside. One of the things that these guys pointed out right away with their really nicely tanned complexions was how pale Kohberger was. They tried to sit around and admittedly, they really had nothing to talk about with Kohberger, but they tried to sit around and chit-chat with him. But Bryan Kohberger was out of his element, however he was trying. And what we've come to know now because of this Dateline episode is that Kohberger had a fixation on pretty young women in bathing suits. When that conversation in the shallow end of the pool didn't go well for Bryan Kohberger, he then went to go start a conversation with the DJ. But that was more annoying for him than anything else, not Kohberger, but for the DJ. Kohberger tried to drum up some talk about being a DJ and what that was like, but the guy was like, dude, you know what? I gotta pay attention to my music or whatever. Peace out. However, one young woman that Kohberger talked to at that pool party named Holly, she also had a little bit of a conversation with him. He brought up how he had just moved there like a little more than a week earlier, that he was in the PhD program, as was she. So they kind of had a bit in common to start from. This woman, Holly, had just moved there as well. She could tell that Kohberger was really trying to make friends and to talk and chit-chat, and she said she felt kind of sorry for him, and she could tell how uncomfortable and awkward that he was. As they talked, she brought up how she enjoyed going hiking and how she recently joined a hiking group. And then at some point, they exchanged phone numbers. He put his number into her contacts, and then she texted him her name. And yeah, so we see that Kohberger was making an attempt to be that college guy that he wanted to be. However, according to Keith, Kohberger may have been trying a little too hard, because while some thought he was loosening up a little bit, mingling and chit-chatting up some girls and getting phone numbers, one particular attendee noticed that there was a side of him that Kohberger seemed to be trying very hard to hide. His creepy side. They could see that Kohberger had become quite interested in two women at that pool party who were wearing bikinis. A moment ago, I said bathing suits, but specifically, he liked women in bikinis. He was apparently being so overt and obvious that it was making these women feel uncomfortable. So one of them, whose husband was there at the party too, kind of noticed his wife was signaling for him to come over, so he did, and those girls walked away from Kohberger and went into the pool. And this is where Kohberger's lack of socialization skills came through. He didn't catch on to the hint that these women weren't interested. Instead of moving on and walking away, Kohberger went ahead and followed them over to the pool and sat on the edge where they were at. It was really uncomfortable. The exchange was awkward, and Kohberger just simply had no idea how creepy and weird his vibes actually were. And it became even more evident to Holly the following day when she received an oddly worded text message from Kohberger. It read, "Hey, I am pretty sure we spoke about hiking trips yesterday. I really enjoy that activity, so please let me know, ! Thanks, ! The only thing that would have made that even worse is if he signed off with, sincerely, Bryan C. Kohberger. I mean, I really enjoy that activity. Very weird. Interesting, but weird. Well, Holly did what a lot of people do. She looked at a text, got distracted, and forgot to reply. At least that's her story. To be honest, I think she was trying to be polite, but at the same time, she knows that she dodged a bullet, or a K-bar as it were. She did say that the text was strange and that it was overly formal. And dreamers, the ways that he's behaving in this manner in which that Kohberger typed up that text message, it kind of reminds me of what a text message from the Isla Vista killer, Elliot Rodger, would have said. They have these mannerisms and ways of speaking that's like from a different era or something. It's really strange. Remember that kid? He went on that killing spree up near like UC Santa Barbara a few years back. We covered it, I think, in 3 parts. He had that manifesto. Yeah, that guy. He was weird too. Anyway, the PhD, he also had a run-in with Kohberger, a second run-in with him, but he actually didn't remember him. That DJ, his name is Zach. He was out hiking with friends at a popular peak there in Pullman, Washington. It was getting late in the afternoon and the sun was setting. They were making their way down the trail, and here comes Kohberger just arriving at the hiking trail, about to go up the incline at night. But the thing was, DJ Zach had completely forgotten that he ever saw Kohberger previously at that pool party. Kohberger, however, remembered him and walked right up and said hi as if they were old buddies. I'm not much of a hiker, but it was unusual for Kohberger to be just beginning that hike. It's a pretty tall summit to get to. At that time, it was getting dark and Kohberger was by himself. So I guess all of that would be unusual and not considered to be safe. But since we know Kohberger is an odd one, then I guess this is the way he operates. Like I said, I'm not much of a hiker. I'll go hiking, but I always worry I'm going to go too far. Not because I'm going to get lost, but because I want to make sure I have enough gas in the tank to make it all the way back. I'm at that age where I have to pace myself. And you know what? I just randomly wondered what the opposite of hiking is, just to see the types of activities I'm more likely to be willing to go do. And the very first result was driving. And I'm like, okay, I'm a non-hiker through and through. But then I kept reading the antonyms and it was like driving, sitting. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. I could do the opposite of hiking all day long, right? Anti-hiking, staying, resting, lounging, dawdling, idling, sauntering, slacking. Yep, all my favorite things. I like to anti-hike a lot. So through the investigation, it was revealed that Kohberger preferred doing things at night, under the cover of darkness, by himself. He enjoyed driving at night, just driving by himself. And it's another thing that I also, Dreamers, mentioned about Leticia Stout. I think in the car, I think it's a place where people like them, like Leticia Stout and Bryan Kohberger, they feel safe to think and be inside their own messed up minds. They feel safe because they're on the move, where they can think and say and do anything they want in the confines of their vehicle and really feel like they're not really being seen. In addition to driving, Kohberger also hiked and went jogging at night, pretty much exclusively. And I mean, I like the nighttime too, but if Kohberger was trying to sharpen up his social skills, creeping around at night like this on a regular basis on his own probably isn't going to do him any favors. Can you imagine encountering someone with the kinds of vibes that Kohberger gives off? Someplace outdoors, public, quiet, and secluded at night? I mean, come on, ladies. Nothing that this guy does feels like it does anything to help him attract women. A journalist interviewed on the Dateline update said that Kohberger is the type of person who prefers to linger in the shadows, describing him as wanting to be like this detached, mysterious type of person. I just think he knew he was weird and he thought darkness would somehow conceal that. Keith Morrison quickly followed up this assessment about him being around at night, being a creeper, pointing out that Kohberger had been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, let me rephrase that. Kohberger's attorneys have reported that he has OCD. And there are so many things out there that can be disruptive to our lives that lead to frustration and anger, but it can also cause people to lose sleep. And all of those things can be contributing factors that lead to other issues going on in a person's day-to-day life. But it really seems like all of this is to prepare for the mitigating factors when it comes time for trial. Later on down the line, if and when Kohberger is convicted and his sentence is being determined. And you know, the guy is insisting that he did not do these 4 murders. But it certainly doesn't sound like there's a lot of confidence in Kohberger being able to come across as not being a homicidal maniac. It's like They know he's going to come off as being an unusual and odd person, and they're putting out all this information out there to try to excuse it away. Like, oh, he's acting like this or behaving like that or talking this way or the other because he's got Asperger's or autism or OCD or visual snow, not because he's a psychopathic killer. No. It's been determined that this was a sexually motivated crime. He didn't do this because he had any of those disorders. Leading up to the killings, he wasn't a psychopathic killer yet, but he definitely had some hang-ups about women, and it's those strong urges and feelings, along with the anger and bitterness and self-loathing and the hatred that he had towards women that led to this. Kohberger can have Asperger's and OCD and visual snow all day long until he's blue in the face. None of that are reasons why anyone thinks he comes across or presents as someone capable of a crime like this. He presents as someone who is capable of a crime like this because he did a crime like this. All of these preemptive excuses for his behavior reminds me not only of Leticia Stout, but also Shonda Vander Ark. I talked about her in the Ruby Frankie episodes. She's the mother of 4 or 5, who starved and froze her 15-year-old to death in Michigan a few years back. She took the stand in her own defense and sat there and bragged about her high education, how she graduated with her Juris Doctorate, top of her class, and scored incredibly high on her first attempt at the bar exam, but then came up with a whole assortment of conditions and diagnoses in order to try and explain away how she didn't notice that her 15-year-old son, who weighed 69 pounds when he died, was actually starving to death. She bragged and bragged and bragged on the stand about how smart she was, yet testified as to how oblivious she was to everything going on in and around her home, her life, and her kids. She is a piece of work, I'm telling you, and I'm considering covering her case. It feels like we've done a lot of cases involving kids and young people lately. I do have something different coming up next, though. Rebecca M., I'm looking at you. No kids involved, though. Thank goodness, right? An FBI profiler, or a retired FBI profiler who often testifies as an expert on obsessive-compulsive disorder, did take a look at Kohberger and this case for Dateline and said that Kohberger is the type of person who prefers to lurk in darkness and does so in order to avoid detection and being identified. So Kohberger is known to have made as many as a dozen trips from where he lived on the WSU campus in Pullman across the state line into Moscow. And just because he did all of those trips, or at least most of them at night, it doesn't necessarily mean he can't or won't be identified. But at the time that Kohberger was making those trips, 12 of them in all, he had only lived there for a total of 5 months by the time the murders took place. So unless he had a legitimate reason for being over there, like work, or maybe he was seeing someone, neither one of those were happening at the time. It's a lot of trips for someone to make over to another state, to another college campus at night, and it's like, for what? I highly doubt Kohberger is going to take the stand. The guy wouldn't even verbally enter a plea to the 4 murder charges, which is what usually happens. Instead, he stood silent while the judge made the guilty plea on his behalf. He couldn't even speak up for himself to deny the charges. I doubt he'll have the balls to get up there and defend himself against them. Kohberger probably never thought that those trips that he made to Moscow would ever come back to bite him in the butt, because who would guess, right? Whatever he was doing, whether he was just driving or he was trying to satisfy his OCD, or if he was surveilling his victims-to-be. Right now, as we speak, he's had more than 2 years. It will be close to 3 years if the trial begins as scheduled. He's had all this time to work up an excuse for his behavior. And if he doesn't take the stand, then his attorneys will be able to try to explain those drives either in their opening or closing statements. If Kohberger does take the stand, then if he's innocent like he wants to claim that he is, then he's going to have a reason for those drives, those 12 drives over the state border at the ready. But there will have to be something to corroborate his testimony, unless he's so arrogant and so full of himself that he thinks he's going to be able to just rest on his laurels, you know? We've seen it a lot in some of the cases we've covered lately. I've done lots of episodes where we hear from the defendants, particularly in interrogation videos that we've listened to or watched, or ones that I've mentioned that I want to cover, such as Leticia Stout, Shonda Vander Ark, Teresa Stone. There was also the Ruby Frankie series we did. There wasn't interrogation in that case, but there was a lot of content to go over. Sometimes we don't get to hear from the accused at all because they made the wise for them decision to not speak to law enforcement and to not take the stand. And these people, Leticia, Shonda, and here I suspect with Bryan Kohberger too, they're going to try to wave their higher educations and degrees around to try to legitimize themselves as an intelligent person who would not do something so stupid. Or with Ruby Frankie or Teresa Stone or even Lori Vallow, these people who use religion and God to further the notion that they're good people with high moral standards who would not do what they were accused of doing. They just simply wouldn't. They're too godly. Kohberger's attorneys are probably going to do much of the same on his behalf. But man, I hope dude takes the stand. I would love to see it, but I don't think that he will. But if he does, I'm certain he's going to play the I'm too smart to be so dumb card. One of my absolute favorites, this is a throwback. She is one who loved talking about how smart she was, so smart that she wouldn't drive the witnesses to the hospital herself, and how ridiculous was that? Diane Downs, that's her. She's the one who set the standard of how awful one can come across when talking about the murders of one's own children. How she played to the camera, how she put more and more dramatics into the story as she went along, and the overwhelming joy and exhilaration that she displayed as she talked about what should have been the most devastating night of her life. Because of her, because of people like her, I hope people like Kohberger take the stand, because it's so fun, but it's highly doubtful because he's weird. Anyway, the trips Kohberger made, or at least the trips his cell phone made, to Moscow started in July of 2022, less than a month after moving to the area. It was the night that he went to that pool party. That was the night he first discovered the place where students from both universities got together to party. The 12 drives that he made all happened within a month, starting in July. And yeah, by August, he had made at least 12 trips. And when he made those trips, his phone connected to a cell tower within 100 meters or 0.06 miles, 600ths of a mile, which is a 2 or 3 minute walk, if that. He could have connected to that tower by either driving by or parking nearby. There's really no way to tell. We just know that he was nearby and he had no business being nearby. Dateline also wasn't able to say how Kohberger came to know the King Road house or those who lived inside, and I don't know if we'll ever know, but just knowing that he was lurking in the months prior and then this all happened, it can be coincidental, but it's probably inculpatory. As for the how and when Kohberger became aware of the King Road house or the students that lived in it, there doesn't seem to be anything included in the evidence that shows that there was any contact or communication between Kohberger and any of the people that he's accused of killing. But there was something that was drawing him to the area in July and in August. We just don't know why or what was going through his mind as he made those trips. His attorneys insist that Kohberger is innocent of these murders, and as long as he continues to deny it, it's likely that we will never know. We won't ever know what he was thinking, what he was doing, how he was planning this. All of those details are locked in the killer's mind. I have a feeling that if we get to actually watch the trial itself on TV and have a chance to see all the actual evidence collected, that the prosecution may be able to formulate a theory that fits everything. Hopefully, it's put together better than the evidence at the Karen Reed trial, the second of which is going on, I think, still. I've been so out of it this last week. I came out of this whole fog of being sick and coughing, and it was awful. I don't want to think about it right now. The biggest news was this feud between President Trump and Elon Musk, these two rich tantrumy toddlers fighting, and it's very worrisome when you really think about it. I mean, these guys are getting on social media and having a feud. Billionaires, politicians, powerful people, all up there acting like a couple of 2-year-olds. I mean, God, somebody go get their binkies and a bottle and let's give these guys a nap. I'm sorry, I'm not even trying to be political. I would talk shit on anybody who is acting like this in public. But at their level, I would expect people of their stature and in the positions that they're in to be above this kind of bullshit. It's really troubling to me, and I can't believe what's going on, but sorry, I don't mean to get all into that mess. I don't even think of them. They're not even politicians, you know? They're just kind of playing like make-believe or something. Like, this is some kind of fever dream, right? I'm living in a weird like parallel universe right now. I'm pretty sure of it. Okay, dreamers, it's the next morning. It's Monday, June 9th. I was really getting tired, as you can tell. I was talking about things that I don't know anything about. So let me get back to where I was at. We were talking about the road trips and the 12 plus trips that he made in July and August, and he continued to do so, he being the suspect, Bryan Kohberger, through September and October as well. They may not have been as frequent. They didn't talk about it in depth, but the ones that stood out were the first 12 that he made in July and August. And that is a lot to do at night for no apparent reason. So one of the things that the Dateline episode mentioned was that 6 weeks after moving from Pennsylvania to Washington, Kohberger conducted a couple of Google searches. One for one of his professors at the university, and the other was for serial killer Ted Bundy. On August 16th, 2022, Kohberger downloaded an assignment or essay that was written by that same professor that he Googled, entitled Ted Bundy and the Malignant Being, an Analysis of the Justificatory Discourse of a Serial Killer. It's a paper on how serial killers themselves justify their own behavior. The behavior analyst who studied Kohberger on behalf of this Dateline episode said, quote, "He can't achieve that level of power," he being Kohberger, "domination and control within his own life. And so he looks to those that emulate those characteristics of success that he's determined to follow and has decided, I can do this." That same day that Kohberger made those searches for Ted Bundy, his professor, and that professor's essay, Maddie Mogan posted a picture of herself with her roommates. From left to right, there was surviving roommate Dylan, sometimes referred to as DM in court work papers, Xana, Bethany, referred to as BF, Kaylee, and then Maddie. Also on that same day, Maddie was captured on police body cam exiting the home to speak to law enforcement about some noise complaints. She's wearing the same dress in the picture with the roommates as the one that she's seen on the body cam video. That was August 16th during the day. There was another visit captured on body cam made close to 9 p.m. on September 1st, where there was actually nobody who lived in the home at the time that complaint was made. Nobody that lived there was present, but they did manage to get Maddie on the phone to address the complaint again. So there were people who had basically all access to that King Road house So Keith had to ask the question of that mom of that friend that I mentioned at the beginning, Ashlyn, if there was a chance that Kohberger had been at those house parties. And there's been speculation about that because he seemed to know where to go. There were people in and out of the house going to this party, even when all 5 or 6 of its actual occupants were not there. Ashlyn's mom said that it would not be possible that Kohberger was ever at any of their house parties because he was too old, and she followed that up by saying if there was anybody old there, they'd have kicked him out, and she said that she knows this to be a fact because she had seen it happen firsthand with her daughter and Kaylee hosting parties at her own home and asking those who weren't invited, who were clearly way older than their late teens or early 20s, to leave. Now, it's pretty obvious that Dateline has a good amount of information since Kohberger was arrested more than 2 years ago. And some of it is really neither here nor there for me. All of this driving around, he's new to the area. He doesn't know anyone. When I moved to Nevada in March of 2020 by myself, I didn't know anyone either. And being in a valley surrounded by mountains, I wasn't even sure half the time which direction was which because in Southern California, mountains are to the north and beaches to the south. So I kind of understand what a lonely move to a new state can be like. And COVID happened. And that made it even more isolating for me. And I did at times, not often, but I did drive around the city by myself at night, particularly the strip when nobody was on it. I'd never seen anything like it. It was pretty incredible to see, but I did the same things. Who am I to judge, right? But then again, I didn't go and murder 4 people. There's that. My point is, Kohberger could have just been trying to get to know the area. It seems like he showed up in this border town of Pullman, Washington, with this new level of confidence in himself that he never had before. Maybe he wanted to start over where nobody knew who he was, all a part of this reinvention of himself, this master's degree, overcoming his drug addiction, weight loss. But the things that people saw, the things that people picked up on were simply things that Kohberger could not control about himself. Probably things that he may not have even realized were going on with him, such as how oddly he came across, how awkwardly he worded things, how uncomfortable he made people feel, and how uncomfortable he actually was in his own skin. We've only seen him in court and being walked around, but he has this really blank stare. He's got this very pale complexion, and he was only 27 years old, but they looked like they were a pretty rough 27 years. Unfortunately, there was not much about Kohberger that was appealing to the types of women that he was interested in. And based on his behavior, we can see why. Creep is a very good word to describe the guy. I've said it plenty of times about him. But for me, in this episode of Dateline, not everything that they found out is earth-shattering or any type of linchpin to the case, but it does give us a little bit more perspective around Kohberger and his short stint as a PhD student at Washington State. Now, another detail that seems like it might not be too big of a deal were the number of times that Kohberger was pulled over as he drove around. What it does do is it furthers a notion or the theory that Kohberger was out there trolling and surveilling. He got pulled over at an intersection 2 miles away from the King Road home and given a seatbelt ticket 5 days after the party on August 18th at 11:40 at night. 5 more days later, Kohberger Google searched the term, quote, "When can a cop detain you?" That former FBI profiler that was on Dateline postulated that Kohberger was trying to learn about the local police protocols compared to his own interactions with them. Then Dateline talked about the Google searches for sexually explicit materials. Again, to me, this isn't that big of a deal. A 20-something college guy Googling this stuff isn't a red flag to me. But his searches did include words like forced, passed out, drugged, sleeping, things of that nature. The FBI consultant said that these follow themes of domination, control, and power. Again, I'm not moved by a person's proclivities in that respect, but I do think I need to know more about the actual crime itself and the murders, and how much of a sexual component there may have been to it all. I believe it's been talked about and described as being a sexually motivated crime, these murders, but I don't yet know what details of the crime itself or what he may have done to the victim he was believed to have been targeting on that deadly night. If we know those details, maybe we'll be able to talk more about the motivations, but I hope that comes out in trial. Kohberger did Google Ted Bundy and that paper that his professor had online about how serial killers justify themselves. And we know that Ted Bundy was very much sexually motivated, and he targeted a very specific type of college co-ed. Now that I'm sitting here thinking about Bundy, there are some parallels that can be made in this case. For example, things that aren't even connected and may have nothing to do with this, is just coincidence, I guess. But Kohberger and Bundy's birthdays were very close. Kohberger was born November 21st, so he's a Scorpio. Bundy was born November 24th, making him a Sagittarius. They both spent time being raised in Pennsylvania. They both attended college in Washington State. Kohberger at WSU, of course, and Bundy at UW. Bundy's first known murder took place about 2 months after he turned 28. Kohberger, when these murders happened, it was just 8 days away from his 28th birthday. Both Kohberger and Bundy had an attraction to a certain type of college co-ed. They were both sexually motivated, at least Kohberger allegedly, but I'm pretty sure we can assume that that's the case. It's been strongly suggested, but for Bundy, we know for a fact that sex was most definitely his motivation. So it's not surprising Kohberger would search Bundy. They've got lots in common. But also, Kohberger was a criminal justice student, and Bundy's life and crimes are certainly a case study. So there's another thing that Kohberger Googled related to his coursework, perhaps. So classes started towards the end of August of 2022, and Kohberger began working towards that degree. Dr. Kohberger is what he wanted. As it were, Kohberger became acquainted with a fellow PhD student named Na-Young Ko. And those of us on the outside looking in, I think we can comfortably say that what occurred between Kohberger and Na-Young kind of resembled serial killer or stalker type behavior on Kohberger's part. How they engaged in escalating behaviors when working up towards the ultimate act of murder, they being serial killers. They begin stalking, they start circling, so to speak, kind of like birds of prey going around and around, getting ready to approach, just like that white Elantra at the King Road home the night of the murders. It was a couple of months before the murders on September 10th, 2022, that Na-Young reportedly had a feeling that someone had been inside her apartment, as certain things seemed moved or out of place. 2 specific things were moved. She had baked a cake and left it on the counter, and when she got home, it had been placed in the microwave. And her makeup in the bathroom that had been on the counter when she left, when she got home, her cosmetics were lined up along the top of the toilet tank. She also discovered she was missing a watch and a letter. It was very late at night when she discovered these things were out of place and missing. So the one person she called was the one person she knew who would be up all hours of the night. Her friend and classmate, Bryan Kohberger. Na-Young was pretty shaken up about the strange things in her apartment, so she reached out to Kohberger to see if she could come over to his place. And that's pretty jarring to know, right? That he's the guy that she called. He said yes, and she ended up staying there that night, and nothing happened. And it wasn't too long afterwards that Na-Young began to wonder if it was actually Kohberger who was messing with her apartment. They had become friends, and in fact, it kind of sounded like she had a bit of a crush on him. They actually had some office space that they shared at the university, and she recalled that the day before the break-in at her house, a spare house key that she kept in her desk was missing. She asked Kohberger about it since they both used that office, and he said he didn't know anything about it. But then a couple of hours later, she suddenly noticed that the key was back in the spot where she normally kept it. That's the kind of stuff that makes you feel like you're sort of losing your mind, right? And that was probably what was happening. But from now on, ladies, let's just trust our instincts. So let's just promise each other that we're going to trust ourselves when we think something crazy is happening and it's not just us. And don't let anyone allow you to doubt yourself or try to gaslight you into thinking things that aren't actually happening. Anyway, this prompted Na-young to buy a security camera system for her apartment that was linked to her phone so that she could look at her place or be notified when there's motion. Well, as it were, Na-young wasn't able to do the actual setting up of the system, so she asked Kohberger again for his help, and he ended up setting up the cameras in her home for her. It was later on that Na-young realized or recalled that Bryan actually tested the cameras and her security system using his phone, not hers. Was it possible that he was linked to her account as well? And was then able to look in on her place whenever he wanted? It really started to get her hackles up. So Na-young started to think that Kohberger was the one who was messing with her all along, which she came forward and reported to law enforcement as soon as Kohberger was identified as a suspect and taken into custody. Whether or not Na-young's suspicions were true, we can't say for sure yet. We might be able to find out in Kohberger's phone records if he downloaded the app to her security cameras, if he logged into them from his phone. I think they should be able to see that, or if he had the same phone still when he was arrested. I don't know. And depending on how far away Na-young's apartment was from Kohberger's, investigators might even be able to see if his phone was actually inside her apartment during the times that she wasn't there and came home to find things out of sorts. Keith hit Na-young up for an interview, but she was like, nah, I'm good. She'll probably testify at the trial, hopefully, and give us a little bit more insight into her relationship with Bryan Kohberger. The one thing Keith Morrison was crystal clear about in this episode was that Kohberger was not having an easy go of it at WSU. Kohberger was a student, but he was also a teacher's assistant. And in that role, in part, it would have him grading assignments and at times teaching the class. True to form of a classic narcissist, Kohberger immediately began acting like he was intellectually superior to basically everyone else, professors included. And so this resulted in a number of complaints made against Kohberger to the department heads. One of the recurring ones being the fact that there was some inequity in the way that Kohberger treated men versus the way he treated women. So much so that students actually talked and gossiped about it at work with their coworkers, specifically pointing out that Bryan Kohberger was problematic. That is significant to me because, dreamers, think about it. You're a student and you're at your part-time job at a boutique or a clothing store, and you're actually talking about how you feel like you're being disrespected, talked down to, and marginalized by this TA, Bryan Kohberger, who's not even your actual instructor, right? It must have really stood out to these people for them to feel the need to go to work and vent about it. And for it to be so memorable that 2 years later, it still stands out. I don't know. I really didn't give a rat's ass about any of my teachers or instructors. I never cared because I didn't really think that there was anything any given teacher could do to make the subject matter any easier or better for me. And I don't know why I had that kind of attitude towards it. I felt like if I couldn't sit there and listen and absorb it, I was never going to get it. And I didn't think that there was anything a teacher could tell me in class that would translate into me being able to fill in the right multiple choice answer on a Scantron come final exams time. I just didn't think I was connecting in that manner, and I don't know why. I have no idea why I felt that way. But the teachers, I didn't care. I didn't rate professors. It wasn't about them. It was about what I was capable of doing. But anyway, female students reportedly said that it was pretty clear that Bryan Kohberger had a serious problem with women. Previously, straight-A students were getting C's in his classes, and it was the women that he was grading more harshly than men. And that professor who wrote that paper on Ted Bundy, she apparently had an accent or not the greatest command of the English language. And while Kohberger apparently had a problem with her to a point that he talked down to her and belittled her, and seemingly got a great deal of pleasure in doing so. And when it comes to the young woman that Kohberger shared his office with, Na Young, she had told a few people that she had some feelings for Kohberger. People who knew of them and their friendship said that they connected well in that they were both far away from their families and their homes. Na Young reportedly tried to express or act on these burgeoning feelings for him, but he ended up backing off their entire friendship after that. Based on what was found on Kohberger's phone, Na Young simply wasn't his type. The investigation into the contents of Kohberger's phone revealed that he followed and screenshotted photos of girls on Instagram, college students from both universities, all of them pretty blonde or brunette girls, white girls, in short dresses, bathing suits, and bikinis. Na Young is Asian. She's beautiful, but just not as Jam, right? Well, while Kohberger apparently did not have any screenshots of any of the victims, he was following friends of all three of the girls, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana. He followed close friends of theirs, but not them. I've heard that he followed one of the victims, but in this Dateline episode, there was no direct connection between Kohberger and any of the victims that have been found that they know of yet. This behavior of browsing pictures of what Kohberger feels is an ideal woman in his own mind is described as a part of his trolling behavior. So if he gets rejected, what he's doing is furthering his fantasies about these women by trolling their social media. Another aspect of Kohberger's trolling behavior that has been studied with killers in the past is these forbidden behaviors he's engaging in tend to escalate. They do stuff like circling neighborhoods, looking at homes, peering into windows, and doing exactly what Kohberger is suspected of doing to his classmate, Na Young, the things that I described. On September 30th, 2022, at almost 1 a.m, Kohberger Googled the term sociopathic traits in college student. The expert who spoke to Dateline said that this might be something a student might Google if he's feeling some type of way, or actually having trouble feeling at all. He said having trouble understanding their feelings towards other people, they might Google it to try and understand what it is that they're going through. But remember, Kohberger at the time was pursuing a criminology PhD, so he could be looking this stuff up for his coursework. What Dateline did find out is that Kohberger's phone hit cell towers 3 more times in the first half of October of 2022 that were located within 100 yards of the King Road house, and, as usual, all during the night. Dateline did a lot of speculating about this behavior of Kohberger's, driving around the house, circling it, so to speak. They don't yet have any idea what he was doing or if he was even aware of the victims just yet when he did those drives. But whatever the case may be, it's just another bit of circumstantial evidence related to this ongoing trolling behavior that he exhibited. And if Kohberger knew of the girls or any of them caught his eye or captured his attention, they really didn't make any efforts to hide themselves or their social lives and day-to-day activities on social media platforms. And honestly, Kohberger didn't really have to struggle to look for them or to see them. Not on social media and not in real life either, since the house was so busy. And so all of their postings were on Instagram and TikTok, and everything was in real time, basically. And it's possible that he was trolling their social media as a way of gathering intel, looking around at their surroundings inside the home, getting an idea of what the layout is like if he was planning something like a late night break-in. Kohberger's cell phone records also reflected the fact that he was still browsing the social media pages of various female students at both Washington State and the University of Idaho, just a month out from the night of the murders, along with more searches for sexually explicit materials using the keyword drugged. Also during this time, on October 14th, 2022, less than a month till the murders, Kohberger was stopped while driving his white Hyundai yet again. This was in the middle of the afternoon, around 4:30. He was pulled over for going through a red light on the WSU campus. Keith Morrison pointed out on the Dateline episode that this was the second time Kohberger was pulled over in less than 2 months' time. And in the episode, they showed the officer's body cam footage of Kohberger, and he still has that same crazed, wide-eyed look on his face that he did when we see him coming and going from court and from the county jail. He just looks like a nutbag. He took the time to tell this police officer that pulled him over, who was a woman, that he was from out of state, which was already obvious to the cops since she pulled him over and probably saw that he had a Pennsylvania plate on his car. He asked questions about the law, but to me, rather than coming across as curious or inquisitive, he just seemed to need to elevate himself to the same level as this officer, if not above her. It's like it's understood that there is a power imbalance when it comes to the general public and law enforcement. And Kohberger had demonstrated that he feels like he's better and smarter than everybody else around him, and that probably included this police officer. And what likely made it worse for his frail little man ego was the fact that this officer was female. And he's demonstrated in a number of ways thus far that he feels superior to women as a whole. He actually told this officer that they don't have crosswalks in Pennsylvania. I don't know what he meant by that. He's from a small town with maybe one of those one stop sign and no crosswalks types of towns, but I'm fairly certain that there are crosswalks somewhere in the state of Pennsylvania. So if you're in the state of Pennsylvania and you see a crosswalk, snap a pic and post it in the group. I want to see crosswalks in Pennsylvania. That being said, even Kohberger's way of trying to establish his dominance with his command of this crosswalk placement or non-placement, it all fell flat. I mean, seriously, think about it. He literally said, "I'm from Pennsylvania and there are no crosswalks." How stupid is that? Dateline pointed out that a few days after that traffic stop with the red light, Kohberger was back on Google searching the term, quote, "Can psychopaths behave pro-socially?" Like I said earlier, it's neither here nor there for me, these search terms that he did. I search weird stuff all the time, and the fact that Kohberger was a criminology student just really lessens the nefariousness of his searches for me anyway. I mean, just compare his little searches to Leticia Staux. She was Googling in real time as the crime was in progress, and her searches revealed some very troubling feelings that she was experiencing while in the midst of raising her stepchildren. She had so much resentment and disdain for the mom, her husband's ex-wife, and that played into her state of mind. These Google searches could play into Kohberger's state of mind as well if he wasn't a criminology major. But the search itself could be some of his own self-reflection, kind of like Leticia, or trying to have some insight about himself. Can psychopaths behave pro-socially? Or in other words, I know I'm weird and I'm probably psychotic. Can I act normal in a social setting? The fact of the matter is they can. Of the two, the sociopath and the psychopath is the one who's able to find success in life, is manipulative, narcissistic, and displays superficial charm. With those things in their arsenal, a psychopath can blend in and function somewhat normally in social settings. And that is what seemed to be going on with Kohberger. He's aware that he's psychopathological, and he wants to know if he can present normally because he probably is realizing that he's not. He may be looking for tips and hacks on how to make that work better for himself in order to get close to whatever weird fantasies he has about these pretty college girls. After that, Keith Morrison pointed out that in less than 2 weeks' time during this period, Kohberger searched his own name 4 times. I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe he wanted to know what people were seeing when they Googled his name. But by October, Kohberger had been putting the feelers out for a couple of months. We know that he was establishing connections and making friends. but he was also not getting along very well as a teaching assistant at WSU, and perhaps there were comments and postings and things of that nature mentioning some of the issues that students may have been having with him and his work as a teaching assistant, because Kohberger will get summoned to meetings regarding his behavior and the complaints that they were receiving about him. He may have been wondering what fellow students were saying about him online, if anything. And what Dateline brought up next was one of those attempts at addressing an incident Kohberger had with a female student. So he was summoned to a meeting, like I said, with WSU administrators just 11 days before the murders. On November 2nd, 2022, Kohberger was asked to come into the office to discuss what was termed, quote, an improvement plan. Kohberger had apparently encountered some pushback from a female student associated with one of his classes, either a class that he was in or a class that he was the teaching assistant. By this time, it had been well established among those who worked with Kohberger in any capacity that he had issues with women specifically. What made this particular encounter alarming was the fact that she already made her way to her car when he approached her and gave off those same vibes that creeped and continued to creep women out. She ended up reporting this encounter with Kohberger in the parking lot to campus administrators, probably the department admins, and this is what prompted that improvement plan meeting less than 2 weeks prior to the quadruple murders. Jumping back to the investigation into Kohberger's electronics, it was revealed that Kohberger's phone continued to ping cell phone towers that were very close to the King Road home heading into November, bringing him, or at least his phone, to within a few hundred feet of the King Road house. And with those final trips prior to the night of the murders, there would be a grand total of 23 trips that Kohberger and or his phone made to that very area near and around the victims' homes leading up to the killings from the time that he moved to Washington. And every single one of them was during the night. The investigation into Kohberger and his usage of his bank or ATM card revealed another tantalizing detail. And I don't think that it was something that was listed in the probable cause affidavit that we took a look at 2 years ago, since Dateline is saying that this is all new, never before made public information. It was Thursday, November 10th, 2022, that when examining Kohberger's financial statements, that he abruptly stopped using his debit card. The court documents this information came from relates to the experts who were given his records to examine, and it revealed that on the date of the murders, November 13th, 2022, they were killed around 4 a.m, and Kohberger's debit card was used on and after that day. But 3 days earlier, on the 10th, Kohberger suddenly stopped using it. The document says, quote, "The disclosure notes the defendant only conducted ATM withdrawals on and after the date of the homicide and ceased using his debit card after November 10th, whereas prior to November 10th, he had regularly used his debit card." The day after Kohberger stopped using his ATM card, he then began engaging in what the court documents termed as, quote, anti-forensic methods to get rid of evidence, which is pretty self-explanatory. They were able to find gaps in Kohberger's computer event logs in the system usage between November 11th and November 16th. The analyst would point out that it would be highly unusual for a student at his or any level for that matter to stop using his computer systems when the school semester is in full swing. There were indications that private browsing and clearing of browser history was occurring, and those dates are important because things begin to occur on his electronic devices beginning 2 days before the murders and continued until 3 days afterwards. Essentially, this is an attempt to erase anything potentially incriminating in the time surrounding the night that Kohberger is accused of murdering the 4 students. Earlier in the episode, kind of towards the beginning, I talked about those what-if moments that are woven throughout this story and, many of our lives. Dateline brought up one involving Maddie's best friends growing up, Ashlyn Navejas. In talking to Keith, her mom said that Ashlyn had lived in the house with the girls. She had already graduated earlier in 2022 and moved out and back home with her parents about an hour and a half away while she went on to whatever she was going to do next in life. But on the weekend of November 12th and 13th, that Saturday night the roommates were all out for the evening, headed into that Sunday that they would all be brutally murdered. It turned out that Ashlyn's parents were on vacation and she was given the task of staying home to take care of the family pets. They were actually supposed to be flying home that Friday evening, the 11th, and Ashlyn had plans to take that weekend to go visit the King Road house to see her friends. There was a big football game that weekend, but the plans with Ashlyn's parents had changed and their trip home was delayed for one reason or another, and they were going to be home a day late. And because of that, Ashlyn had to stay with the pets for an extra night, making her unable to make that drive down back to see her friends in Moscow, at that King Road home that she had once shared with them. As Keith Morrison so eloquently stated, if ever a favor ever asked by parent turned out to be such a godsend. And yeah, those are the what ifs that give me chills. That big football game was played as scheduled. It lasted about 3 hours that afternoon and finished up a little after 7 p.m., less than 9 hours before the murders. Across Dateline over at his apartment in Pullman, Washington, sometime after 8 p.m., Kohberger was at his home using his cell phone. He was looking at videos on YouTube. At 9 p.m., Kaylee made the final Instagram post of her life. The picture of the 5 girls who shared the house along with Ethan in the middle. And in doing so, she shared with the world in her caption as to how lucky she was to have these people in her life every day. Later that night, Etha and Xanon went to a party together at a neighboring frat house. Kaylee and Maddie hung out at a local bar called the Corner Club. They got there around 10 p.m. that night. And a few hours later, it would be in the small hours of the next morning at 1:27 a.m., just hours before the murder, Kaylee and Maddie left that bar and walked over to the grub truck. Many of us have seen video images of them because the truck live streams their business on Twitch. Is it Twitch or Discord? One or the other, I can't remember. Something. From there, they got a safe ride home from a fraternity volunteer. A lot of times we say it was an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, kind of like that, but it was a campus fraternity brother volunteer. That driver took them from the grub truck to the King Road home, and they arrived there just before 2 in the morning. The other 2 roommates, the surviving ones, Bethany and Dylan, they also got home around that same time from where they'd been that night, followed by Ethan and Xana a little later on. So between 2 and 2:30 that morning, there were 6 people inside that home, the 5 that lived there and Ethan. He was the 6th and likely an unexpected guest if the killer had done his homework and surveilled the premises. At 2:26 a.m., Maddie and Kaylee made some phone calls to one of their boyfriends. There had been some relationship drama, if memory served me correctly, and almost exactly a half hour later, Bryan Kohberger's phone is powered off. Exactly 32 minutes after the cell phone with the phone number known to belong to Kohberger was powered off, at 3:26 a.m., a white Elantra was identified as being in the area of South Moscow. At 3:30 a.m., a camera mounted on a neighboring home or property captured video images of a white Elantra making a left turn onto the road where the King Road home is located, which is located just slightly out of view of that camera. 3 minutes later, this would make it 3:33 a.m., that same car passed by that same camera headed in the same direction. That car and whoever is driving it, Bryan Kohberger, is circling. And that same white Elantra came around again 5 minutes later at 3:38 a.m. It came around again 2 minutes later, headed back in the direction that it last came from, leading away from the camera and the King Road home. This would be 3:40 a.m. The white Elantra came back around again, past that same camera, back towards the King Road home, passing by this camera for a sixth time now, again headed towards the home and past that camera. It did it again at 3:56 a.m., only to turn around once again and passed by, going away from the home 2 minutes later at 3:58 a.m. At that time, inside the home, the roommates were mostly in their own rooms, or at the very least on the level of the home that their bedroom is located. Remember, we're talking about a house with 3 stories. I did make a diagram at the time that I covered this case. I'll find it and I'll bump it to the top of our discussion page when this episode comes out. So yeah, by 4 a.m, everyone was pretty much in their own rooms, either asleep or about to be asleep. However, it is known that Xana was still awake at this time, as she had received a food delivery at approximately 4 a.m. At 4:06 a.m., the white Elantra passed by that camera again, as if it were driving away for the 3rd or 4th time by then. I kind of lost count. But this time, instead of turning the way it had turned in previous passes, it turned in the opposite direction, which would be to the left, all there right in view of the camera. The car then turned around like a 3-point turn. It stopped, it backed up, and it U-turned back onto King Road, back towards the home where the victims resided for the last time at 4:07 a.m. This was the time that the killer decided that he would make his way into the home and carry out his plan. His car spent a total of 38 minutes circling the victim's house. Once that vehicle went off camera for the last time prior to the murders, it went and parked somewhere, and the killer made his way inside. The driver of that vehicle had with him his K-bar knife and the knife sheath. I explained in the first episodes that we did on this case that the home is built in such a way that the entrance in the front takes you into the home on the first level. But when you go around to the back where the rear entry was located, which was a sliding glass door, it takes you into the home on the second level. It is believed that the driver of that white Elantra parked around the back of the home and gained entry through that second level glass door. That door enters into the kitchen, and it was left unlocked, and that is how the killer got inside so easily. From there, the killer quickly made his way through the kitchen towards the staircase headed up to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor is where Maddie's bedroom was located. Now, if Xana was awake, which we know she was, we know that Ethan was also asleep in the bed. He may have encountered them first. I'm not completely sure in what order the victims were killed in. We might be able to find out that information based on the evidence when the trial happens, but I don't know if there is enough evidence to even be able to tell in what order the victims died. But because we believe or have been led to believe that Maddie was the intended victim, or at least the target of this crime, it's believed that that's where he wanted to go first. And it is believed that the killer understood her to be residing on the 3rd floor of the house by herself. Kaylee had recently lived in the home, but she had moved since she finished her course of study, but was back that weekend to visit with her friends and to show off her car and to go to the football game and whatnot. She wasn't supposed to be there, so it's been surmised that the killer wasn't expecting to find 2 women in the room. He was expecting to only see Maddie. They had gone to sleep together in Maddie's bed. Despite the fact that the killer was confronted with 2 occupants in the room instead of the 1 occupant he was expecting, he moved forward with his plan regardless. A struggle ensued and noise and commotion was created in the process. At the time on the 2nd level, the level which the killer entered, Xana had been awake, having received that food order that I just mentioned. It's believed that she made her way out into the kitchen, and she possibly heard noises coming from the 3rd level, causing her to ascend the stairs to see what's going on. When the killer realized Xana was there, either on the 3rd floor or in the hallway coming up the stairs, his attention was drawn away from Maddie and Kaylee and turned to Xana. This is, of course, if the theory that Maddie and Kaylee were murdered first, and then Xana and Ethan. He could have killed Xana and Ethan first on his way up, and then murdered Maddie and Kaylee 3rd and 4th. The blood evidence may be able to tell the story, but I don't know all of those details just yet. That's stuff for the trial. So if he was killing Maddie and Kaylee first, and Xana heard the noise and started to go upstairs, she encountered what was going on and possibly retreated back down the stairs, at which time, of course, a chase would ensue. And in this moment of fear and confusion and pandemonium, the killer, armed with his K-bar knife, accidentally dropped the sheath because it was found on Maddie's bed. That's the theory. He was attacking and stabbing Maddie and Kaylee in Maddie's bed, in Maddie's bedroom on level 3. Xana was coming up to the second floor, drew the killer's attention. He quickly went from his attack on Kaylee and Maddie and turned toward Xana, and in doing so, he left his knife sheath behind on the 3rd floor, unknowingly. Xana quickly made her way back down to the 2nd level, presumably with the killer trailing behind, chasing after her. It's believed that Ethan was asleep in her bed. She tried to get there to get away from the killer. She had apparently made it into her bedroom, but the killer was pretty much right on top of her, and a desperate fight ensued. It was said to have been brutal. About 10 minutes after that, Elantra made that U-turn and headed back towards the King Road house at approximately 4:17 a.m. It is believed that a full-on fight to the death was in progress inside that house. So much so that a security camera on a neighboring home captured the muffled sounds that were described as the faint, distorted sounds of voices, whimpering, and a loud thud. A dog also started barking at the time, and you can tell by the bark that it was alerting to something was wrong. Now, Xana had been mortally attacked, and by the time she was incapacitated, dead, or in the process of dying from her injuries, the killer's attention was turned to Ethan. He was either very deeply sleeping or really passed out from drinking earlier in the night, but either way, it did not seem as if he was immediately jolted awake by the commotion. He stayed asleep or was in the process of coming out of it. Either way, he was not going to be of any help to anyone in the state that he was in, to no fault of his own. Based on the information Dateline obtained, the killer delivered a stab to some place on Ethan's body that severed a major artery. It was apparent from the way the blood spatter patterns were documented in the room. Blood was spurting from a wound because of his still beating heart. For a killer who is motivated by anger and sexual violence, if there are men on the scene or in the location, they are usually taken out of the equation very quickly to eliminate that threat to the killer's plan. An odd thing that was reported, and the exact wording of this detail was pointed out on the Dateline episode, but after fatally stabbing Ethan, the killer used the knife to carve into his legs. That was a direct quote from Keith Morrison. He said, quote, "carved Ethan's lower legs." And that carved is the exact word that he used. To experts, this feels like this act of carving into Ethan's skin was rooted in anger towards men in these situations, where the crime itself was motivated by women and sex. It was a different kind of anger towards men that's expressed when inflicting those types of carving injuries. Based on some of the blood impressions on a chair inside one of the bedrooms, it is believed that the killer sat down for a moment, that he became exhausted. It is thought that he did not expect to be killing 4 people, that he only went there for 1. He was tired, he sat down, and left blood impressions on that chair. The energy and adrenaline that it takes to carry out a murder plan is something we really can't understand unless we've made a habit of killing people. That adrenaline rush, I guess, I've been told, I've heard, it's been said that it's draining. I personally wouldn't know. So the killer, he's eliminated 4 people in a matter of a dozen minutes, if that. And from there, he tried to leave the same way he came in, through that 2nd floor glass door. And that's when he encountered a 3rd roommate, Dylan M. It was she who shared the 2nd floor with Xana. Her bedroom was across the way, catty corner, if you will, from Xana's on that floor. She had come out of her room when this chaos was going on, and it was then she encountered the killer. She had come face to face with him, but had no idea who he was or what he had just done. She had opened the door and saw someone coming down the hall. From there, she reported she heard a male voice saying something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She witnessed a man in black clothing wearing a mask that covered his mouth and his nose, walking in her direction. Later, Dylan, in reporting this information to law enforcement, would admit that she was extremely intoxicated at the time. Dylan described this man as being about 5'10", maybe a little bit taller. He had an athletic build and bushy eyebrows. As he walked past her, she kind of stood there, frozen in shock. In the moment, she couldn't say anything, but if she had, who knows what the killer would have done. Like if she yelled out for help or something. It's likely she may not have survived this. Instead, she retreated back into her bedroom and locked the door while the intruder continued to make his way out the rear entrance. She understood that something wasn't right about the man that she saw, but she had been asleep after a night of drinking. She wasn't clear-minded enough to put it all together or to call 911. She's simply not understanding what she actually witnessed. The killer, who had just moments before dispatched 4 of her friends and roommates. I talked about it in the previous episodes that we did on this case. These young people aren't going to think that their friends had just been killed. They know something is amiss, but they're far too afraid to investigate. And we know that white Elantra left for the last time at a much higher rate of speed than the previous times that he circled the house prior to gaining entry into the home. He would have probably driven off quickly regardless of running into Dylan in the hallway. I've never murdered anyone, much less 4 people, but I can imagine that there is an adrenaline rush. But because he encountered Dylan on his way out, the killer may have assumed that she was going to get on her phone and dial 911, so it was imperative that he got out of there quickly. But as it turned out, Dylan did not call 911. At 4:20 a.m., just 13 minutes after it last drove up King Road, the Elantra made its final appearance on that neighbor's outdoor camera, leaving at a very high rate of speed. And like I said, you can hear the tire screeching and the engine revving as he turned and continued up the street. He floored it. In fact, Dateline found out that he left so quickly that he actually almost ran someone down in doing so. As the killer left the scene of the murders in a hurry, Dylan was still in her own bedroom with the door securely locked. She began calling her roommates, and of course, the calls that went to either Maddie, Xana, or Kaylee were never answered. And for reasons that we are kind of beginning to understand, she didn't raise the alarm. She did not call 911. Down on the first floor of the home, Bethany was also trying to call everyone's cell phones, getting the same results as Dylan. At 4:22 a.m., Dylan sent a text message to Bethany that said, "No one is answering. I'm really confused right now." And she mentioned that the guy that she saw had something like a ski mask on, sort of. I think we found out later that the killer was wearing a black hoodie with a black COVID mask, and she described it as being something over his head and his mouth, but I don't think it was a ski mask. She texted, "I'm not kidding. I'm so freaked out." Bethany texted back and said, "Come down to my room. Run down here." Dylan followed the instructions. She left her bedroom and hightailed it down from the second floor to where Bethany's room was located on the first floor. As she passed by Xana's room, she saw Xana on the floor of the bedroom. Her head was pointed towards the wall and her feet were pointed in the direction of the door. It was dark and Dylan was running. She had been drinking. She did not see the bloody scene. Her immediate thought was Xana had too much to drink as well and passed out on her own bedroom floor. Dylan made her way down to Bethany's room. They locked themselves in there and continued to try to make contact with anybody else that lived in the house at the time. They tried texting, they tried calling, and they got nothing. In the meantime, the white Hyundai Elantra carrying the killer, ostensibly Bryan Kohberger, along with his phone, was headed south along the state line. It was 28 minutes after that car and that phone left King Road home that the phone was powered back on and pinged a cell tower south of Moscow near the city of Blaine. Phone records indicated that Bryan Kohberger was a cellular customer for that specific phone number. The phone had gone south and began heading west, where it hit a tower in the state of Washington near a town called Johnson. Then at 5:39 a.m., an hour and 19 minutes after that Elantra sped away on that video camera, a white Elantra pulled back into the campus where Kohberger resided, hitting a tower that covered his place of residence. It is believed that he spent that time cleaning up and getting rid of evidence along that drive. After the phone arrived in Pullman and began hitting a tower that covered the apartment where Kohberger resided, that very same phone connected to him made a call at 6:17 a.m. It linked to that same tower that covered the place where he resided, and this call was just shy of 2 hours after the killings. The duration of the call was 36 minutes, and it was made to a number associated with Kohberger's dad over there in Pennsylvania. After that call, 2 more calls from Kohberger's phone were made to his dad, the longest having been 54 minutes long. We also know that the killer, Kohberger, probably, was most certainly waiting on pins and needles for the news of the homicides to break. But as the sun rose and the hours ticked by, it was inexplicably quiet. No one had raised the alarm. And I really wonder what was going through Kohberger's mind as he waited to hear the news of what went down early that morning over there at the University of Idaho. I wonder if he even questioned his own sense of reality, like, why isn't this deed getting any media or law enforcement attention? Like, did he think, did this even happen? Was this all a dream? No, this wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare that was yet to be discovered. About 3 hours after the murders, around 7:30 in the morning, phone and social media activity at the King Road home picked back up again. Bethany was up and made a phone call to her dad. 35 minutes later at 8:05 a.m., Dylan was on social media for a short period of time, while at other various times that morning she continued to try to get in touch with her roommates through text messages and DMs. Now, this is one of the things that really stood out to me in this whole story, and it was the fact that the phone associated with Kohberger made its way back to the Moscow area that morning, several hours later. And from that bit of information, we can infer that Kohberger was also back, as was his Elantra. This was just after 9 a.m., so going on about 5 hours from the time the murders were taking place or about to take place. The phone stayed in the area of the King Road home for close to 10 minutes before going back to the area where Kohberger resided. I made the assumption that he was looking to see if there was any police activity at the home because remember, he's waiting for this news to hit. But if he drove by the home that morning after, he would have seen nothing out of the ordinary. Nobody had called for emergency services yet. The murders had still not been discovered. Dylan and Bethany seemed to be trying to figure out what was happening without having to unlock their bedroom doors. Back in Pullman, Washington at his apartment at 10:31 a.m., Kohberger took a selfie in his bathroom mirror that is so chilling I find it difficult to look at for too long. But there is something so wrong with this guy, I don't even really know how to put it into words. And I put lots of things into words. This look that he has on his face is different from his standard dead eye stare forward. He's standing outside of his shower. Obviously, he just had taken one. His hair still looks a little damp. His eyes look bloodshot, really red. All around his eyes, it's red. The whites of his eyes look red. It's so weird. And he has a small smile or a smirk on his face. And he's taking this selfie in a mirror, giving himself a thumbs up. I mean, dreamers, think about that for a moment. This guy on a Sunday morning, he looks like he's been up all night with those bloodshot eyes. He's a guy who never smiled at anyone or anything. He thought he was going to come to Washington State and be like some kind of big man on campus with his lofty degrees, yet he turned out to be anything but. He was not well received. He wasn't being respected, And one by one, students and faculty were distancing themselves, or at least not allowing themselves to get too close to Kohberger. And they certainly weren't letting him into their friends groups. So let's think about ourselves for a moment. We're in our late 20s. We feel like we have some kind of superiority complex because we're in this prestigious college program, getting our PhD, wanting to get that coveted degree in order to just automatically jump to the top of the social echelon, since there is no other way to get there because of our weird mannerisms and behavior. He's encountering problems making friends and meeting girls and getting along at work. He's getting called in for quote-unquote improvement meetings. He's getting complained about by other students. He has no respect for the people above him. Professors at the school irk him. It's like a slap in the face for him to be made to work under a professor who's foreign and female. Nothing is going right. He's falling apart from the inside out. And let's assume for a moment that he did commit these 4 murders. It's not a stretch to think that, but he's not been convicted. However, we're pretty sure that they got the right guy. And looking at that picture, that selfie, assuming that he's the killer, this is a photo that was taken just over 6 hours after that white Elantra sped away from that King Road home. It's a Sunday morning. He's taking a shower. He's wearing a dress shirt. And so I have to ask, what the fuck are you dressed up for? Where do you think you're going? What the freaking hell are you smiling about? And who in the chiz gives themselves a thumbs up in the mirror? He's not going to work. He's not going to class. He's certainly not headed to church, brunch, or anything of the sort because he sucks and has no friends. What's the story behind this photo? Why is he taking this bathroom mirror selfie and giving himself a thumbs up? What is he smiling about? What is he wearing a dress shirt on Sunday for? It's like this was the moment he was proud of what he did. Remember, this is a guy who wrote in an online blog or forum when he was a teenager that he, quote, felt like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. As he hugs his family, he looks into their faces and sees nothing, like as if he's in a video game but less. That he's unintelligent, he was experiencing depersonalization and felt little to no remorse, that he often found himself making simple human interactions, but it's as if he's in a role-playing game, as if he could see what's going on and is slightly into it, but can pause the game and focus on real life. That he viewed everything as if he were playing a game, pointless and full of nothing, out of reality. That when his family celebrates and has group hugs, he's stuck in a void of nothing. That he feels completely no emotion, feels nothing, he feels dirty, like there's dirt inside his head and in his mind, and he's always confused and dizzy. That he feels eerie and alone and no longer wants to be alive. But yet, in this mirror selfie, here he is, feeling great about himself, smiling and giving himself a thumbs up after carrying out one of the most brutal mass murders in recent times. That is the event that brought him to this level of satisfaction, and it is nightmarishly scary. It also seems odd to me for this shirt to be buttoned all the way up. He might put on a tie later on, but then again, I have to ask for what? I looked at other people in this Dateline episode, the other men that were wearing dress shirts, and I noticed the way that they were wearing theirs, and unless there was a tie, all of their shirts have the top button unbuttoned. I even looked it up on Google, and Google said, when wearing a dress shirt, you can button it all the way up, but never button the top button unless you're wearing a tie. Like I said, maybe he's going to put one on after the selfie. I don't know, but why take the selfie before you even put the tie on? You'd think he'd do that first. It just immediately stood out to me, and when I even think about it more, if I was walking around the store, at the mall, or just at the casino or whatever, and I saw a guy wearing a dress shirt that was buttoned all the way up to the top, and he didn't have a tie on, I would definitely think that was odd and out of place. And let's not forget, those eyebrows, they're bushy on top of everything else. That was the one thing that Dylan pointed out, his eyebrows. And those are there, the pictures, the selfie taken the same exact morning. There's so much going on in that selfie beyond it just being a selfie. Giving himself a thumbs up for a mass murder, well done. I'll post it on social media when this episode or episodes go live. I decided to keep it into one episode. I was going to split it up, but I thought, nah, you guys can pause and come back to it yourselves. I don't need to upload 2 different episodes. So an hour after Kohberger took that bathroom selfie, his phone records indicated that it pinged on a tower about 35 miles south of where he lived. It was a cell tower for the town of Clarkston and Lewiston. Keith Morrison said he may have been dumping incriminating evidence on this drive, things that he used or wore while carrying out the murders. I don't think so, because I think he thought he was possibly going to get caught since somebody saw him leaving. So I think he was dumping the evidence right after the murders on that long drive south away from the crime scene. As the late morning was about to turn into afternoon, 911 still had not been alerted to the murders. The 2 surviving roommates had not put the pieces together. They had not investigated beyond what they could get from their phones. So in Dylan's statement about the events of that late Sunday morning, she was still afraid to leave the bedroom, so what she said she did was she called another friend. That call took place at 11:50 a.m., and she asked that friend to come over to the house. And when that friend did arrive, her boyfriend accompanied her. When they arrived at the King Road home, I'm assuming they came up to the front, which is where the first level entrance was located, and that's where Bethany's bedroom was at. There were only 2 bedrooms on this first level, and it seemed like that was all, and maybe a bathroom. You need to ascend the stairs to get to that second floor to get to Dylan's actual bedroom, Xana's bedroom, the dining area, the kitchen, and the sliding glass door to access the back patio and backyard. The friend who came over with her boyfriend arrived, and he, along with Bethany and Dylan, made their way up the stairs to the second level. Dylan said when they got to the top of the stairs, she again briefly saw Xana. She began to cry, thinking Xana was still intoxicated and passed out on the floor. But the boyfriend could see that something violent had occurred, that this wasn't simply a case of too much drinking and passing out. As soon as he saw that this was much more serious than that, he told Dylan and Bethany to get out of the room. All the blood had rushed from his face. The girls could see that it really was as if he had seen a ghost. He instructed them to call 911, that he said that there was someone unconscious. Ultimately, it would be Bethany that made that tearful and fearful 911 call. If you listen to it, you can hear the terror. They played the call in the Dateline episode, at least some of it. Maybe I'll put some of it in the beginning. If you heard it, then I did. If you didn't hear it, as I'm talking about this right now, at this point, 2 hours and 11 minutes into this episode, I forgot. Anyway, the caller sobbed into the phone. "Hi, something is happening. Something's happened in our house and we don't know what." She provided part of the address, but suddenly, after giving the numbers, she was unable to finish and another female got on the phone. This female was noticeably calmer, probably the friend that they called over, and finished providing the address and said that one of the roommates is passed out and that she was drunk last night and is not waking up. So the initial impression for these roommates and friends is that this was an alcohol-related emergency. She finished up by saying that one of the other roommates saw a man in the house last night. It did not take long for Moscow police to arrive at this home that had once been alive with roommates, college students, friends, laughter, and fun. It was now eerily silent and filled with death. Police found Xana on the floor of her bedroom, dead in a massive pool of blood. Ethan laying dead on her bed next to her. Maddie and Kaylee were on the 3rd floor, still in the bed that they shared that night next to one another, the bed soaked with blood. All 4 of them had been stabbed to death. Soon, the news Kohberger had been waiting for, 8, almost 9 hours later, began to trickle out of the college town. News that 4 University of Idaho students were murdered in their home. and soon we all became aware of this town called Moscow, a town that I'd never heard of before, even though 10 states have a Moscow. The one where these 4 friends died is the largest. I remember being shocked and trying to catch all of the news, but soon the hours turned into days and days turned into weeks. There was just no news coming out of Moscow. And I remember law enforcement being criticized for the lack of information regarding the case. So for me, I knew I would cover this case, but I told myself I wasn't going to do anything until there was an arrest. I did the same thing with the Delphi murders, and that took almost 5 years of waiting. Maybe more. Was it more? I think it was more or less 5 years. While we did have to wait for an arrest, it wasn't nearly as long as the Delphi killings. 47 days after the 4 were murdered in that house, news broke that an arrest was made. But those 47 days were terrifying for the city and the surrounding communities. But the one thing law enforcement insisted upon was the fact that this was a calculated and isolated event and that there was no threat, no reason to fear that this was going to happen again. But that line of reasoning didn't ease the anxiety and the worry that someone out there had just slaughtered 4 people in cold blood, just like that. 4 promising lives snuffed out in a matter of minutes. Moscow was never going to be the same. It would be the following day, the day after the murders, that we learned the names of those who were killed in that home on King Road. Beyond the shocking nature of the crime, beyond the fear that was instilled in this community, beyond the terror that people were feeling, there was a sense of anger. The Moscow Police Department were suddenly saddled with a case that they were not prepared for. So the Idaho State Police and the FBI were contacted to lend their resources to the investigation. And it wasn't too long after that they figured out the killer had left behind an important piece of evidence, a crucial, critical piece of evidence. That knife sheath he dropped in the midst of his killing spree, and it had his DNA on it. We didn't know any of this, though, not for about 47 days. That knife sheath didn't just change the direction of the case, it gave direction to the case. One of the things that investigators discovered about that knife sheath is that it was identical to the one Kohberger had purchased on Amazon 8 months earlier, while he was still finishing up his master's degree over there in Pennsylvania. In addition to the Amazon purchase of the knife sheath, it was discovered through the investigation that 2 days after the murders on November 15th, starting at 4:34 in the morning, Kohberger's phone revealed that he was browsing Amazon once again. And once again, he was looking at K-Bar knives. Keith Morrison said that Kohberger clicked the Buy Now button, but it wasn't clear if he actually finished up the transaction. It doesn't seem that he did, but he apparently navigated away to something else. The following morning on November 16th, 2022 at 9:16 a.m., Kohberger Googled the search term University of Idaho murders. This would be identified as the very first time that he actually Googled the crime. Just 3 days later. It was also on that day, 3 days after the murder, that the Moscow police held their very first press conference related to the case. They gave up little, basically no information. They said they were doing everything that they could to solve the murders, thank you, and left the podium. 5 days after the murders, on November 18th, 2022 at 12:16 a.m., Kohberger's history on his phone showed that he watched something entitled The Perfect Killing Machine, Ted Bundy Serial Killer. After he watched that, he watched some content on YouTube regarding the 4 victims on Inside Edition. On that same day, Kohberger went to the local DMV and swapped out his Pennsylvania license plates for Washington State license plates. He then took 4 pictures of his car with the new license plates mounted. After that, I'm going to take a quote from Keith Morrison directly. Over the next 6 weeks, records show photos and videos and news updates about the King Road murders were viewed or saved on Kohberger's phone at least 60 times. Keith Morrison described it as collecting everything he could about the incident. The DNA had been recovered from that knife sheath by November 22nd. But we had no idea, though. This was all being kept very hush-hush. That isolated DNA had been found on the snap of the sheath and was sent to an independent lab for testing. It was also on that same day, November 22nd, that Kohberger searched for utility knife sheath and K-bar knife sheath. He again did not complete his transaction. After that, Kohberger researched and navigated to web pages where he was looking for information regarding the deletion of Amazon account activity. Toward the end of November, Kohberger snapped more selfies of himself. Just some more weird, expressionless pictures. The next morning, on November 28th at 2:11 a.m., Kohberger watched Dr. Grande's YouTube channel. That's one of the ones that I enjoy watching. Maybe some of you as well. If you haven't heard of it, he's like maybe a counselor or a therapist, a psychologist of some sort. And he does, like 15-minute videos analyzing people's behavior and personalities and various crimes and things that are recommended to him. Not just crime, but a lot of other stuff too. So Dr. Grande released a video analysis of the University of Idaho murders and titled it Echoes of Ted Bundy. On November 30th at 6:39 p.m., Kohberger searched his own name. By December, Kohberger was still watching YouTube videos related to other high-profile crimes, one involving the original Night Stalker, Joseph DeAngelo, the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and the like. On December 6th, Kohberger was back on Amazon looking for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath once again. Either Kohberger was looking to make sure he had the sheath all along if authorities ever came knocking, or perhaps he was planning for whatever he wanted to do next. He's probably thinking at this point still that he wasn't going to get caught, because by then, several weeks had already passed and it didn't seem like authorities and law enforcement were doing anything. By the way, dreamers, the fact that Kohberger was mostly Googling the knife sheath, doesn't that kind of suggest that he still had the murder weapon? He did Google both the knife and the sheath, but based on what Dateline reported, it seemed like he was more interested in the sheath alone. They never did find the K-bar knife, so if he did keep it, he no longer had it by the time he was arrested. It was also during that first week of December that there was a press release asking the community to keep an eye out for a very specific car, a 2011 through 2013 white Elantra, along with stock photos. Later on, that would be amended to include 2014 and 2015 Elantras. It would turn out to be 2015, I think it was, that included Kohberger's vehicle. I guess they were really trying to get information out, and so model years can last, half a decade or so. When they just included those 3 years, 2011, 2012, and 2013, that did not include Kohberger's. But the flip side of that is the 2014 and 15 and possibly even 16, I can't remember off the top of my head right now, were still exactly the same model, shape, size, and everything. It hadn't changed yet. So they amended that. That was a point of contention for the defense at first. Like, hey, you weren't even looking for the right year of car. It didn't matter because they looked exactly the same. You couldn't tell the year of the car just by looking at the outside of it. So the news and the asking of the public's help about the car happened that first week of December. At that time, we did not know of Bryan Kohberger, but those who were close to him, his family, his sisters, they knew. When they saw the Elantra on the news, they knew it. And then, according to Keith Morrison, by December 10th, 2022, the DNA found on the snap of the knife sheath had been entered into two relatively small genetic databases that collectively had approximately 2 million DNA profiles in it. They cross-referenced the DNA from the knife sheath in those databases, but yet they turned up no matches. So what investigators decided to do next was enter the unknown DNA found on that knife sheath into a database that had many, many more millions of profiles included in its system. But there was an inherent problem. In the fine print of the company's policies and guidelines, what the FBI wanted to do, upload that unknown DNA to compare to their bank of profiles, law enforcement is specifically prohibited from doing that very exact thing. Standards and protocols were implemented by the United States Department of Justice that specifically prevented these databases from being used to make familial genetic DNA matches in order to identify unknown DNA related to criminal matters. There is a catch, however, which is why we're here and which is why we found Kohberger's DNA, right? It all depends on how you feel about genetic DNA, like law enforcement dipping into those databases. And here's the thing, these are guidelines. These are FBI policies. These are private company policies. They prohibit law enforcement from poking around in these databases, but it's technically not against the law. There is no specific federal legislation preventing investigators from going into millions and millions of people's genetic information. In the Dateline episode, the update episode, the geneticist said, these are only suggestions. She said, quote, if a federal employee is the one doing the genetic genealogy or an agency is getting federal funds, they are supposed to follow that being those guidelines. But it is not a final law. So, essentially, the FBI decided, hey, we're the FBI. Policies, smallicies, we're making it up as we go along, literally. They reached the conclusion that what happened at the University of Idaho had enough urgency that the threat to public safety was heightened to a level that justified the overriding of their own rules. I guess that would be similar to those exigent circumstances that we talked about back in the Ruby Frankie series. In that case, there was enough evidence of a life or lives being in imminent danger that law enforcement were able to justify the entering of Jody Hildebrandt's compound without having a search warrant signed by a judge. So, essentially, the FBI granted themselves the authorization to get that DNA uploaded into that database clandestinely. They entered that DNA into one of the largest DNA databases, MyHeritage, which holds millions upon millions of DNA profiles that could be compared to that little tiny bit of genetic information that was lifted off of that knife sheath snap. So meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, while the search for the familial DNA match was underway, Kohberger's father was fixing to make his way from Pennsylvania to Washington State. The purpose of this trip? To ride cross-country with his son as he made his way home for winter break. The fall semester, Kohberger's first semester as a PhD candidate, was winding down. And from all we've heard thus far, it was as disappointing for Kohberger as everything else in his life had been up to that point. He was in one of the most beautiful areas in the United States. I mean, every part of this country has its own unique beauty, but there is just something so majestic about the Pacific Northwest. I need to go visit there again sometime soon. Anyway, Kohberger hoped to leave all of his letdowns and his dashed hopes and dreams behind and to start anew. He could be anybody that he wanted to be. He just couldn't get past the fact that he was trapped in himself and there was little to nothing that he could do to escape his own self-loathing. It tends to follow you. I can imagine Kohberger driving there across the country in his little Elantra that summer, hoping upon all hopes that he'd be able to reinvent himself. He's got his bachelor's, he's got his master's, he's already placed himself above the majority of the incoming matriculating students. He went in there with this confidence, propped up by these academic achievements, but he was still the same rotten, tormented person that he'd always been on the inside. And he seemed like a quiet, unassuming man. He probably thought he could push his real authentic self down and to try to allow his accolades and his academic achievements to speak for him. Unfortunately, Bryan Kohberger is an inherently creepy human being, and as a woman, speaking for many, if not all of us, we know those vibes and we know them well and we pick up on them, and they stick with us. I always think back to serial killer Rodney Alcala. Remember him? The dating game killer? He actually won the date on the game show. But as soon as the Bachelorette met him face to face after the show ended and they were going to plan their little date, she didn't waste any time. She hightailed it the fuck out of there and never looked back. And to this day, she's remembered for saying that she did not go on that date because he creeped her out. Yeah, there has been absolutely no images or footage of Bryan Kohberger that I've seen since he was arrested, even reaching back to his adolescence and teen years. There's no photos or anything out there where he did not have that crazy, weird, dead look in his eyes. He was a creepy kid, and he's a creepy adult, and it wasn't just the college girls that picked up on it. The guys did too, and so did the faculty that he worked with at the school. I'm sure he even came across as weird to the officers who pulled him over too. I mean, you watch those body cam videos, he looks crazy. I don't know if he's just strange or has no self-awareness, or maybe he's just a plain shitty driver, but to me, he kind of got pulled over a lot in a short period of time. So even his driving isn't normal. Kohberger's dad flew out to Washington State so he could accompany his son on the drive back home across the country for the winter break. Now, according to the Dateline episode update, from information that they've gathered, it was during this ride or at some point following the press release regarding the white Elantra, and the dad, his name is Michael Kohberger, he had little twinges of suspicion that began gnawing away at him. And it seemed to really begin with the announcement of the car. His son drives that very same make, model, and color of vehicle that investigators are looking for in connection to the quadruple murders that just took place the previous month, only 15 minutes or so from where his son resides. Of course, they're aware on some level that Bryan Kohberger is somewhat emotionally disturbed. His family was aware of this. So we know to an extent that Kohberger's relatives, the ones that lived with him, his sisters, his parents, they had those ideas about him floating around in their minds when he was making that drive home to come and spend the holidays with them. According to Google's AI, Michael Kohberger flew to Washington on December 16th, 2022. But on the Dateline episodes, it seems the dates might be a little bit off because it said that a little after 2 a.m, Kohberger was looking at something on YouTube with some ominous lyrics or words that read, "Something is wrong with me. I can't be who I need to be. Something is wrong with me. Will it last for eternity?" And that he was doing that on December 15th. And then the Dateline episode said later that day, he was already on the road with his dad headed back to Pennsylvania. We know this because Kohberger was pulled over yet again. And the date on that officer's body cam was December 15th. So AI got it wrong. Kohberger's dad probably flew in the day before. I know this is nitpicky, but artificial intelligence should, by definition, have it precise. Just me. Anyway, yeah. And not only were they pulled over on December 15th, they were already in Indiana. So they'd been on the road for a while by then. It was only 10:42 a.m, too, when they got stopped. And this time, they got pulled over twice within like 10 minutes, one right after the other. It had been speculated that law enforcement was already tailing Kohberger by then, but I don't think they had the information about the DNA just yet. Officials have denied that they were tracking Kohberger on this road trip with his dad from Washington to Pennsylvania. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Kohberger has already demonstrated several times over what a shitty driver he is, and he was going to get pulled over regardless, whether law enforcement was following him or not. So a few days after father and son arrived home in the town of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, the DNA that had been surreptitiously uploaded into MyHeritage managed to pinpoint a geographical area of interest based on that genetic information. They first found it to be DNA prevalent in the northeastern area of the United States. And eventually, that was whittled down to the Kohberger family. And eventually, again, that was narrowed down to one specific branch of the family, the branch that included Bryan Kohberger. It's very easy to narrow it all down to him, since his branch of the family consisted of himself, his two sisters, his mom, and his dad. Based on the DNA, if they had to pick one out of the 5, it could have only been him. The coincidences were lining up, and the DNA was sealing the deal. Dateline published a couple more weird selfies of Kohberger that he took of himself there in Pennsylvania. He's wearing dark clothing, a WSU hoodie, a black beanie, also under the hood. I'm sure it's cold. It's winter back east, right? And so this might be normal garb for people all the time. I guess, maybe. I don't know. I don't put on black hoodies and things obscuring my face and take selfies in mirrors and look sinister and weird with a dead stare coming from my eyeballs. And it is winter, like I said, and it's not unusual to be dressed warmly and to be wearing hoodies indoors and beanies, I guess. But the selfies are what doing it for me. That's what makes this whole thing weird. Well, as Kohberger was there to spend the holidays with his family couldn't help but notice his weirdness had escalated. People who knew them said that among the things that they noticed was the fact that Kohberger was wearing disposable gloves all the time and separating his personal trash from the trash of the rest of the family. It was so unusual and troubling that one of Kohberger's sisters confided in their dad that she suspected he might be involved with the murders. I remember that detail from the first time around when we told this story, and I remember thinking, and I may have even said it in the episode, because I usually say everything that I'm thinking. It's usually the opposite when it comes to families. Families don't right away suspect their own family member. But I believe that Bryan Kohberger was such and is such a weird and odd individual that his own sister suspecting that he was involved in the Idaho murders was a reflection of how they felt about him, what they knew about him, and what they believed him to be capable of. Because who thinks that? Well, the answer is Bryan Kohberger's family, that's who. Now that the investigation had zeroed in on the Kohberger family, what needed to happen next was a definitive match from him. Once they identified him specifically as a suspect in the family, to make that exact match to the DNA from the sheath. So during the night on December 27th, 2022, investigators took some trash that had been set out for pickup. That trash was rushed back to the lab in Idaho for testing. And that trash they tested had DNA on it that was found to be the biological father of the person who left the DNA on the sheath of the knife. Dateline pointed out that same day that the DNA test came back to the dad of the killer, Kohberger was on his phone watching more video clips of Ted Bundy. I literally almost said Al Bundy just now. Well, the cover art of whatever video he was watching, it was called something about Ted Bundy, the essence of a killer. It had a shadowy figure with his face obscured, wearing a dark hoodie that was the artwork of the show that he watched. And what do you know? Kohberger is playing dress up again that same day, taking more selfies of himself in a dark hoodie with his signature dead stare face. Dateline talked more about what Kohberger was watching on YouTube, but hey, if watching weird shit on YouTube was a crime, we'd all be in jail right now. Well, as soon as they got that DNA matchup to the biodata of the killer, a tactical team began around-the-clock surveillance on the family home. This would be by December 29th. Kohberger was inside the home while an entire team of law enforcement officials had the place covered. Kohberger had no idea the walls were closing in on him. He was probably getting more and more comfortable as the number of days between himself and the murders steadily grew. He probably felt safe, a couple thousand miles away, not a word coming out of Moscow regarding anything about the case. This is exactly why we wait patiently, you know? I was so anxious during that time. I remember not wanting this case to turn out to be a 5-year-long odyssey like the Delphi murders had become at that point. The silence out of Moscow, the state of Idaho, and the FBI was really painful to sit through. Fortunately for us, it wasn't going to be like Delphi. According to Dateline, at 12:33 the next morning, December 30th, 2022, members of that tactical team were looking on when they saw a man wearing a black hoodie turn on a kitchen light. Then he went into the garage for a moment. Then he walked back into the kitchen, but now he was wearing gloves and holding a Ziploc bag. Less than an hour later, the tactical team forced entry into the home and took Kohberger into custody. And I'm fairly certain that we all woke up the next day to the news and we were relieved. I mean, I was relieved. As soon as I knew he was identified and arrested based on DNA evidence, it wasn't just relief, but confident relief that the right person was in custody. No longer did we have an anonymous phantom murderer. Dateline reported that Kohberger's family were also detained while he was arrested and taken out to the squad car. And it was said that Kohberger suggested that when they were done with whatever they were there for, that perhaps they could go get some coffee together. One of the people interviewed on Dateline talking to Keith said that her impression upon seeing him in the news was that he was a nobody, and that the girls that he killed would have never even given him a second thought, a second glance, not even a first thought or a first glance, not the time of day, not nothing. She literally called him a nobody, and that's exactly what he is, a nobody. Shortly after he was taken into custody, Kohberger's place in Pullman was raided. Kohberger was given the perp walk into the Monroe County Courthouse in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. He waived extradition and was transported back to Washington State. He was then driven over to Moscow, where he made his first court appearance in Idaho, maybe a 15-minute walk or so from the home where all this death and destruction and carnage took place. This is where Kohberger was indicted on 4 charges of first-degree murder, charges that would ultimately have him being made to face the death penalty for what he was accused of. A few months later, a not guilty plea was entered for this coward on his behalf because he refused to stand up and speak for himself. Things moved along quickly until the decision was made that the state of Idaho was going to seek the death penalty. And that's when the system kind of slowed down somewhat. I don't care what Kohberger gets sentenced to, but Idaho seems pretty cozy with the death penalty. The firing squad, you know, there's good old Chad Daybell. They're not messing around up there. They put his ass on death row last year. That makes 9. As for Kohberger, if he's convicted and sentenced to death, he will make 10. The next order of business was to have the trial moved, so it will be taking place in Boise, more than 5 hours away, and it's the same place where Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell were tried and convicted. I've sometimes been skeptical about juries and whether or not moving the trial is even going to make a difference. But you know what? Honestly, after what I saw happen to Lori Vallow down in Arizona, when she just wrapped up her trial earlier this year for conspiring to have her husband Charles Vallow murdered back in 2019, what I heard from the jurors after the verdict, they really had no idea that Lori Vallow had already been convicted of 3 murders. They had no idea Tylee Ryan was dead, murdered by the very woman that they were there to judge. They really can find a fair jury that hasn't heard much about the case. After the years of things happening like O.J. Simpson and the officers who beat Rodney King and Robert Blake and Casey Anthony and George Zimmerman, all of them. A lot of us haven't always had a great deal of faith in juries, and we tended to blame the jury, but there's just so much more to know and not know that goes into it. But yeah, I think a jury or two got it wrong here or there. But now, after hearing what I heard in Arizona, I do very much believe in the process. We just have to wait and watch, and they have to look hard for people to fill those 12 seats or however many seats they need to fill for the alternates. It's hard for us who follow these stories to not understand how someone could have not heard of Lori Vallow or Bryan Kohberger. But they're out there, though. I really saw that this year down there in Phoenix. So, Bryan Kohberger, through the judge at his arraignment, has pleaded not guilty. As far as I can see, he is denying involvement. To me and to most of us, it looks and feels like it would be an uphill battle for Kohberger and his defense attorneys. But we've been surprised before, even when we think it's a slam dunk. I mean, did you all listen to Lori Vallow in her post-trial interviews there in Arizona? She very casually said things like, tragedies happen, and this was just a series of family tragedies. That's so vague and so non-specific, but all it would take is for one person to see it that way. Yeah, and maybe Tylee Ryan took her own life. Maybe Tylee was the one that murdered JJ. Maybe this was all one big weird catastrophe. It only takes one of those jurors to feel that way. So we just have to stand by and wait and see what they have to say. It seems like the cornerstone of the case against Kohberger is that bit of DNA found on the snap of that knife sheath. That has been the only actual piece of evidence that linked Kohberger to the scene of the crime. Nothing else. He somehow managed to savagely slaughter these 4 people with a huge knife and left not a single bit of trace evidence of his handiwork anywhere in his car, on his person, or in his apartment. So, in terms of the DNA on the sheath, experts can, will, and do say that DNA is a transferable thing. And yeah, it might be on the snap of the knife sheath, but that doesn't mean he was the last person to handle the sheath. Meaning the argument could go, yeah, Kohberger did buy a knife like that on Amazon. There may or may not be any way to tell if that's the exact sheath that he received with the knife. The knife's never been found, of course. But he could have lost it. It could have been stolen. He was shopping for another one in the days and weeks following the murders. And therein lies the potential reasonable doubt. But, he was searching to buy a new sheath. And based on his searches, he was more so searching to buy a sheath more than he was searching the whole set of the knife and sheath together. In addition to that, the state has suggested that there may be something to be said about there being potential alternative suspects being considered through the various tips that came in on the tip line, and also unidentified blood that was never tested on the outside of the house, on a deck railing, and some DNA or something found on a glove at the scene. The defense is contending that the state investigators never tested the blood, nor did they make any effort to try and figure out where that blood came from, which may very well crack open the door to reasonable doubt. Now, I'm not one to worry about these details on their own. When you put together the whole case and the whole story, when you start to puzzle piece it together, that's when the avenues to reasonable doubt begin to close down one by one. Everything will start to point to the killer. And to me, all the little stuff adds up to Bryan Kohberger being the one responsible for this. And it's not just a whole bunch of little bits of circumstantial evidence. It's big things. His car, his phone, his internet history, and that DNA. When it comes to the unidentified DNA that was found around the property, the state didn't test it because they didn't want to know who it belongs to, because that raises the chances of identifying alternative suspects. And that's up to them if they want that to be the way that this is going to go down. If they're avoiding that, though, then perhaps this man shouldn't be facing the death penalty here. Another concern for the prosecution's case against Kohberger involves the surviving roommate's eyewitness account of what she saw that night. The one who the killer passed by as he left out the back door after carrying out the murders. All she could see was he had a mask over his face and bushy eyebrows, medium build, a little bit tall. All of that matches Kohberger, but she was unable to pick him out in a photo lineup. That shouldn't matter because his face was covered. Eyewitness testimony is fallible, and it's not really as necessary or really relied upon as much as it used to be. There are plenty of pieces of evidence and information that the state feels confident points directly to the killer. And for them, that's the man that they've charged with these crimes. His car being around, his phone being turned off and on at times conveniently surrounding the murders. Kohberger's alibi is he was out for a scenic drive. All of the internet searches, the purchase of the K-bar knife, the DNA. It's little bits and pieces, but it all comes back to him. Towards the end of the Dateline episode, it is mentioned that Kohberger is on the autism spectrum and has OCD. In an article in the New York Post, it said that Kohberger also apparently has some sort of developmental coordination disorder, and they wanted to use these conditions as reasons why he should not be facing the death penalty. His emotions, his expressions, or lack thereof, as it were, are caused by one or more of these conditions. He has this intense stare and emotionless face because of it, and they simply don't want that look of complete disconnection to be associated with him being identified incorrectly as a mass murderer. Yeah, well, if we use that logic, then all people who emote normally can't possibly be killers, right? I just listened to this whole thing about Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, and all the reasons why he was able to get away with upwards of 40 or 50 murders, however many that he's accused of or he confessed to, because he was efficient, methodical, systematic, and smart. And he was able to carry on with life, work, and family as if nothing weird was going on in the background. Like, oh, he's so average. There's no way that he's murdering that prolifically, yet here we are. No, the whole thing about autism and OCD and this developmental rigmarole for me, it's just noise. You don't get a pass because you weren't able to connect emotionally with others. The New York Post called this the defense a la Gen Z. I don't know, it's a topic that deserves attention, but to me in cases like this, where lives are so senselessly lost, maybe the guy can be spared the death penalty, but at the end of the day, his victims weren't given the same consideration. He didn't care about their lives, their experiences, and perhaps even their own mental health issues. And then all of a sudden, we have to hold his hand through the whole process. How Kohberger comports himself in the courtroom is all up to him. He's there because of the way he comported himself in the early morning hours of Sunday, November 13th, 2022. The article also said this, quote, additionally, the coordination disorder is evidence that he can't possibly have committed the crimes because he doesn't have the dexterity that would have been required to butcher Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan in just a few minutes. Hello, it was 4 a.m. Those kids were drunk and most of them were asleep or about to be asleep. Them being passed out drunk is so much of a normal occurrence in that house that it wasn't even alarming to Dylan, who saw Xana passed out on the floor twice, for anyone to be concerned enough to call 911. None of this was alarming to them. I mean, to an extent, but not to the point where they called for help. That's how passed out these kids can get. And for no one to feel it necessary to take any meaningful action, to me just demonstrates how easily they all made it for the killer to efficiently dispatch them all in a matter of minutes. Well, the concern is how Kohberger's demeanor and behaviors are consistent with a person on the autism spectrum, and the fear is that the jury will misconstrue his vibe as being sinister. How about his vibe is sinister because he did that shit? Lots of people have a flat affect in court. If he's so concerned about how the jury is going to interpret things, then he should have opted for a bench trial. In this case, I don't really give a shit about his various conditions. The judge ruled that the jury won't be hearing anything about it because they don't meet the standards in Idaho in terms of mental health criteria evidence. But the judge did say that if Kohberger decided to take the stand and testify, then he is more than welcome to discuss his autism spectrum diagnosis. I can't even imagine what it would be like to hear this man try to explain himself from the stand. There's still a chance that Kohberger could work out a plea deal, plead guilty and get life in prison without parole instead of potentially being sentenced to death. He has to know and be aware of that other high-profile Idaho case that's been going on. Chad Daybell is sitting his murdery ass there on Idaho's death row as we podcast. There are not a lot of people on Idaho's death row, only 9 of them right now. But because of the lack of access to lethal injection chemicals, Idaho was like, all right, bring back the firing squad. And that's exactly what they did in the summer of 2023. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. We got to get the conviction first. Even though this feels like a solid case, we've been surprised plenty of times. And so with that, we wait. The trial of the state of Idaho versus Bryan Christopher Kohberger is set to begin August 11th, 2025 as it stands. There may be a delay, there already has been, but if all goes as planned, as the kids head to school, just as the young people at the center of our story once did, even the accused on that day, Kohberger is going to be made to answer to 1, 2, 3, 4 counts of murder. We will be listening, watching, waiting, hoping upon hope that justice is had for Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Madison Mogan. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I love you all. I missed you guys in May. Take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.